Today I'm speaking with Sacha D'Souza. Sacha, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me, Tim.
Yeah, and we had to coordinate our schedules here because you are over in Sydney, Australia, and I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia. So thank you for working with me on the time zone difference.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. And I apologize for the Australian accent that you're going to get. And if you might need to just put some subtitles at the bottom of the screen for anybody who doesn't come from Australia.
Yeah, we can't understand you. No, I love your accent. I was just interviewing someone else recently who was from there, and we were doing the whole Crocodile Dundee jokes and all that. But I'll keep those to a minimum in our interview. I did want to just add for a context before I give a bio for Sacha. It feels kind of like part two of a two-part interview. I interviewed your wife Sherry quite a few weeks ago, and that interview was just an absolute joy to hear her story. And one of the reasons that I want to make sure I preface this and make sure I don't forget to say it is, in that interview, we were not intending to really tell your story or try to go down your path at all. And we didn't too much, but there were a couple times when she said stuff about you. And the more that she spoke about you, and I don't think she was trying to intentionally say, he is just amazing, he's the man. But the more that she spoke about you, I was like getting this impression like, wow, he is quite an amazing person. And she really testified to how just supportive and loving and patient and gracious you have been. And I'm sure she's, would say the same, you'd say the same thing about her, but just, she really sung your praises. I think without meaning to necessarily, it was easy to pick up on, and it just shone through that you really have quite a story to tell. And it's amazing how you all have kind of supported each other in quite an amazing way. So I'm looking forward to getting into the details here.
Thank you. Yeah, she really enjoyed her conversation with you. And, the love and respect that I have for Sherry and her story, and the fact that for the first time since coming out of religion, she's actually able to be a person in her own right. She has her own story that she can share. And I absolutely love that. I've seen her grow from being the typical suppressed woman in the religious circle to just being a person in her own right. And I absolutely love that. And yeah, we work in so well as a team. And her interview with you, the discussion with you was actually a beautiful discussion for me to listen to. Even though I'm her husband, I learned a lot too. And there were so many things just to hear her pour her heart out like that was beautiful.
Yeah, its stories are so powerful. I feel very privileged to be able to, be the host of this platform and just hear so many stories, and they really do hold so much power, especially as you get into, I think to me the thing that stands out so much with the stories is when you realize and you talk through the idea that I didn't think I had any power to challenge anything. I didn't think I could speak up. I thought I just had to kind of bow my knee, and to realize so many different people from different perspectives and different words saying effectively, I decided to actually say, no, something sounds wrong. And until I figure out what it is, I'm going to speak up. I do have a voice in this. I don't have to sit down and be quiet anymore. And that was just,
absolutely.
I love seeing that in people.
And I want to thank you on behalf of all of those that you've interviewed, because you've done that. You've created a safe space for people to actually feel heard and validated, important, that their stories, that their life is actually something that can be shared, and that their stories can be of encouragement and support to other people who are navigating their way through this journey of life, maybe this journey out of faith. The amount of stories and the amount of people you've interviewed, if people haven't had a chance to check the back catalogue, I strongly encourage people to do it. And you have such a beautiful manner with people to draw them out that is just so refreshing. So thank you for creating this safe space for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for saying that. And while we're talking about stories and platforms, I was going to say, I'm sorry I'm putting your bio off here, but just one more thing. This would be a really good place to maybe do a plug for Lloyd Evans. Could you tell us just real quick before we get into your story and even your bio? I don't usually push off bios that long, but since we're talking about platforms, who is Lloyd Evans? And I'll have the link, by the way, for his channel beneath our chat here. But who is Lloyd Evans, and what is his role in some of these discussions?
Well, Lloyd is one of many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who have a social media presence, a platform on YouTube, where they really just help to analyze and critically dissect the teachings, the doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses. And So many of these YouTube activists, you might like to say, or platforms, provide an insight into the culture, the thinking, the practices of a very insular, high control religious group, and that's Jehovah's Witnesses. So yeah, there's a great catalogue of videos from a wide array of people online who have really helped to shine a spotlight on Jehovah's Witnesses. Not to attack individual Jehovah's Witnesses, because that's never a healthy place to come from, but to more expose the practices and the hierarchy of the religion, perhaps, you know, those taking the lead in the religion. So certainly not coming from a place of attacking those and individuals, and not coming from a place of trying to make individual believers look stupid or anything like that, but just to expose and perhaps shine a light on the organization as a whole.
Yeah, and I've watched quite a few of Lloyd's videos. He's got a gentle spirit and a kindness to him, that just a grace that shines, and it's such a cool example to me, because when you're a Christian, you kind of get this idea that if you leave Christianity, you leave Christ, you know, where's your morality going to come from? You certainly can't have the grace that would just shine. And you look at someone like Lloyd, and certainly people like yourself and Sherry, and you see this graciousness, this love that just is like, it's to me it's stronger than even Christian love, because it's just so like, you don't care what people say or do, you're going to love them no matter where they're coming from. Whereas obviously with most Christians, if you say certain things, they're gonna ostracize you on some level, which I know we'll be getting into here shortly. But anyway,
well, that's a great, good point though, Tim. You know, because the Christ-like love is actually a very conditional love, and yet what we all on the other side of religion are trying to demonstrate is that respect for people doesn't need to be governed by, you know, the small parameters of a religious bubble. We can just respect people for who they are as people. That to me is a far more powerful love. And you know, you talk about Christians like to quote the golden rule, which is all about doing to others as you would have them do to you. When we come out of religion, I actually like to adopt what's called the platinum rule, which is do to others as they would like done to them, or treat others the way they would like to be treated. So it takes the onus off us treating them the way that our insular religious bubble might treat them. And it says, well, how would you like to be treated? What would you like? So it gives people the dignity and the respect that they deserve. And that only happens when we actually extract ourselves out of a narrow insular religious bubble.
Yeah, good point. And the way I phrase that to my kids is I say, we're gonna bless each other's socks off.
I love that.
I do want to make sure I get to your bio at some point. Well, let me go back and say again, if anyone that hasn't seen Lloyd Evans, I have not personally interviewed him yet. I'd love to at some point, but I want to make sure I give a plug. He's got a great channel, great interviews. I think he recently interviewed with my friend Derek Lambert on Myth Vision as well. So plug for Myth Vision, please go and support these platforms. They're doing amazing work nonstop. But anyway, back to your bio, Sacha. And I honestly thought at first I was going to pronounce your name Sacha. It's Sacha, right? S-A-C-H-A.
No, it's Sacha. Yeah.
Oh,
Sacha.
It is Sacha.
It's soft. Yeah.
So I've been mispronouncing it this whole time. Okay.
That's okay. I like to say that it's the same as you would pronounce Sacha Baron Cohen, because if I could be half the man that that he is. The one movie that was his claim to fame, boy, I forget what it's called, but Borat. Don't ask me to put the Borat accent on.
Anyway, Sacha D'Souza lives in Sydney, Australia. He was born and raised as a Jehovah's Witness. He, at this point, has his own business, which he's had for about 18 years in Sydney, in the office equipment and IT fields. He also, just like his wife, volunteers with the Recovering from Religion group, and he's done that for the last year and a half. And he helps run the 60+ support groups worldwide. So is there anything else besides that you'd like to add to the bio?
Oh, thank you. How do you sum up a life in 30 seconds? I think you did well. You did well.
And of course, you're married to Sherry. Do you all have any pets?
We do. We have our two little fur babies, Abernathy and Sydney. They are Abyssinian cats. And prior to them joining our family, we had another little Abyssinian cat, Derby, who was our baby for 15 years. Absolutely loved him. He was the center of our world. We never had kids, so our love went to our fur babies, and we unapologetically love our fur babies, and all the joy that we're able to, the love we're able to give them and the joy they bring our lives. So yeah, we love them. Don't get me started. I could talk for hours about them.
That's awesome. Well, I do want to dive in. We obviously went through Sherry's story real slowly, and it was great to hear the details. I kind of wanted to start the same way. I know we'll have some different, changes in your story compared to hers, but I'd love to just hear from the earliest days, what you were taught, and especially, what shaped your worldview.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I must admit, coming into this conversation, as I was sharing with you before we started recording, I felt uncomfortable because I don't feel comfortable just talking about me. That's not, I like to be there to support others and listen to other people and show interest in their lives. I'm not actually comfortable talking about myself because I just don't think my life's that interesting or that of that importance to people. But I do appreciate that this opportunity is a nice, this is a nice chance for me to, at the same time, be able to process my life. And when I look back, I had a good, very good life. I have a very good life, and I had a good upbringing as a child. I was born and raised in Perth, which is on the west coast of Australia, and Perth is a beautiful city. My heart will always be there in Perth. It's a beautiful place with lovely beaches and just a nice lifestyle. And I went to school there. I'm an only child. I felt like I had a very loving home. My parents gave me everything that I needed. I wasn't a spoilt child, but I certainly didn't lack for anything. And I look at my parents, the way they raised me. It was at a time when the economy wasn't the best. They had a lot of pressures financially, but I never felt that as a child growing up. I felt safe and secure. But I also was raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses by my father. And he was several generations in, second or third generation witness. So it was very much part of our life. And my mother wasn't a witness, though. She was not a religious person. And she and Dad actually met before I was born, at a time in his life where he had left the religion. He wasn't a part of the religion. He'd sort of, as a child, he'd been raised in it, and then his mother died when he was very young. His father remarried somebody who was a Catholic, so he was then basically raised as a Catholic. But in his early 20s, he once again was contacted by witnesses, and there was an emotional pull for him, because he recalled that this was the religion of his mother, who he had lost at a very early age. And so he was drawn back into the religion because the religion provided for him an answer on how he could see his mother again. If he adopted this religion, if he formed a relationship with Jehovah God, and he was a good Jehovah's Witness, he would see his mother again in the resurrection. So I think that had an emotional pull on him. And so when I look back at that, and from the stories I've heard from my father and mother, Mum and Dad met and had a beautiful relationship as late teens, early 20s. Dad played in music groups all over Perth. He played in the music scene at pubs and gigs. He was a very good musician. He had long hair in the 70s, and he was a great guitarist, singer, bass player. And he gave all of that up when he was contacted by the religion again, and by doing his Bible study, as Jehovah's Witnesses call it, he was drawn back into it. And so he gave all that up and did a complete change. And he was never a bad man when he was pursuing his lifestyle with music and all that. He was always a good man. Obviously, Mum would never have fallen in love with him. But what happened in those years was that the man that she fell in love with completely changed. And he didn't become a bad person, but he became a very religious person who turned his back on all of his previous friends. He changed his appearance, he changed his style to be a good Christian man. And he always has been a very good man. He's he will do anything for anyone. But the religious influence changed the personality of who he was. So I would love to have known who my father was before the religion molded or shaped him, because I think he would have been an amazing person.
Did they stay together?
They did. They stayed together. And the main reason was mum recognized he was a good man, but she didn't know how else to react. You know, she felt the pressure to have to go along with him on this religious journey. And so in those first few years of their marriage, she also had Bible studies with Jehovah's Witnesses. But she tells me, as we've had conversations now as adults, she said it never quite made sense. And so she kind of was in this between a rock and a hard place where, in order to keep her family together, by then I'd been born in the early 70s, she realized that she needed to play the role of being a good, supportive wife. And if that meant supporting him in his religious journey, well, that's what she needed to do. So she basically gave up her right to be an individual as well. She cut contact with many members of her family. She stopped going to all of the Christmas celebrations with her extended family. I never was raised celebrating birthdays or anything like that, because she had to adopt the expectation that he had put upon the family unit. And it's really sad to see. She was an absolutely skillful hairdresser. She'd been trained overseas in the UK by some very, very well-known hairdressers. She was, you know, wonderful at her skill, but she kind of had to put all of her passions and her self-development on hold because she had to conform with being the good, supportive Christian wife, even though she wasn't.
It almost sounds like the world kind of caved in on her a little bit with that story.
Yeah.
Like just lots of restrictions. So did she ever make a profession of faith in Jehovah?
She did she went along with what was expected of her, attending the religious meetings. She got to the point where she would also go out in the door-to-door ministry as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, but she never got to the point where she got baptized. And so for Jehovah's Witnesses, that's kind of the time where you devote your whole life. And that's done as an adult once you've learned the doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses. But she didn't get to that point.
Is it kind of a scandal if you don't eventually do that? Like if you're like, come on, let's do it, and you just kind of like linger too long? Does
Absolutely.
It kind of get like, what's the problem?
You get judged. You get judged from within for not being spiritual enough. You obviously don't love God enough because you haven't gone to that point. There's no allowance for somebody saying, look, thanks for all these studies, but I just don't believe it. It's not for me. There would be a suspicion that, well, you probably don't want to do that because maybe you're a sinner. Maybe God actually hasn't chosen you. Maybe, it's always the person's fault, because what other option is there except to continue to study with Jehovah's Witnesses? And if after 2 to 3 years of study, you haven't yet become a baptized, immersed witness, well, there's a problem with you. And so we see that with Jehovah's Witnesses around the world, particularly for children who are born in. You are expected by your early to mid-teens to get baptized as well. There's an expectation that if you don't do that, well, maybe we should draw back in our relationship or our association. So when I look at my mum's situation, that definitely caused a bit of a rift with mum and dad, because dad expected her to go along and adopt the one true religion, because Jehovah's Witnesses refer to themselves as the truth. And for her to not do that, well, that caused some problems. But dad expected me, as the only child, to be raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So my earliest memories were being a witness, going to meetings 3 times a week, going out in the ministry on Saturdays and Sundays, spending all morning out door to door, walking around the streets, knocking on doors, preaching to people about God, God's kingdom, Jehovah God. There was no option for me. There was never even a consideration in my mind that I wouldn't do that. And mum's told me that in those very early years, there were some very heated discussions where she would say to him, let him be a child. No, he doesn't need to go. He can stay with me. But that wasn't an option. He was far more powerful and more, it was a different time. The man ruled the house, and what he said went. And there's some pictures of me as a little 4 or 5-year-old standing there dressed up in my, best shirt and tie, going out in the preaching work with him, because that was the only thing to do. So I basically grew up not thinking that there was ever an option but to do that. That was that was life. And being one of Jehovah's Witnesses is not, you're not a witness on weekends. It is your whole life. It encompasses every aspect.
In what circumstances would he have ever been encouraged to pursue divorce, or would he?
Well, that's the funny thing with Jehovah's Witnesses. They do speak about those who have unbelieving mates as being someone that needs to be treated with caution and reservation, because these ones might take you out of the faith. And so the witnesses also take marriage very seriously. There is no reason for a witness marriage to break up except on the grounds of immorality or infidelity.
Right.
But at the same time, he couldn't fully commit to that relationship because she was a worldly person who had chosen not to take up the opportunity to develop a close personal relationship with Jehovah and get baptized. So in his mind, if Armageddon came tomorrow, that's okay. She's going to die because that's normal. So I've got to think, as an adult, you look back now and you go, how healthy is a relationship where you're supposed to be really closely committed to your marriage mate? And yet the reality is every night you make a solemn prayer to God, asking him to bring on Armageddon, which Jehovah's Witnesses believe is the destruction of every single person on the earth except for Jehovah's Witnesses. And that includes your marriage mate, if they're not one of Jehovah's Witnesses. How healthy can a relationship like that be when you're actually praying to God for the imminent destruction of the person that you are in the most closest relationship with?
Yeah. Can I ask just a couple of quick questions for clarification? You talked about baptism and you said immersion, so that helps get a picture. Is there an assumption though that once you get baptized that there are certain steps that you take as soon as that's over? Like, is that when you start to become an actual door-to-door witness? Or like, what is I know with the Amish, for example, what you can kind of sow your wild oats, and I've heard stories where these Amish boys will drive their buggies into town where they have a garage that they've rented and a car that they've rented or owned. They'll drive the car around town and then they'll park the car and drive their buggy back home. But that's kind of like sowing the wild oats and doing some things you're not supposed to do. But when you get married, you're kind of saying before God and the community, I'm getting serious now about the Amish beliefs and the worldview. I'm putting all that stuff behind me. That's my old life. I got my wild oats out, and they kind of don't frown on it too much because they think, yeah, get it out of your system. But once you get serious, now there's certain things that follow once you get married. What is that like? Like when baptism occurs, what are the next few steps after that?
Well, interesting you say that. That's very different with Jehovah's Witnesses. You are expected to conform to the way of living as one of Jehovah's Witnesses the whole way through. There's no opportunity to go out and just live a worldly life or live a free life before you commit. You commit when you start down that path of studying with Jehovah's Witnesses. You're expected to live that lifestyle. And if somebody studies with Jehovah's Witnesses using their publications, which are supposed to be guidebooks to help you get through the Bible, they say you're not studying the book, you are studying the Bible. Oh, but you need our books in order to understand the Bible properly. So a Bible study with one of Jehovah's Witnesses has a Jehovah's Witness publication and Jehovah's Witness Bible, and they are used hand in hand. But they're basically indoctrination and training sessions into the Jehovah's Witness way of thinking and acting. So that's expected all the way through. So for a child growing up as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you are already in that lifestyle. There is no opportunity to live outside of that Jehovah's Witness bubble. You will be judged badly if you do that. So you don't go out and do things that are considered non-Jehovah's Witness approved or worldly. No, because there'll be consequences. But if you progress along, you get to the point where you then get baptized, which I believe strongly with Jehovah's Witnesses is generally there's a cultural expectation for that too. Young witnesses who are raised in witness families, you don't have an option, because if you say to your family, I don't believe this, I think I might leave, you will be viewed badly. Now, if you haven't yet taken the step of getting baptized, being immersed, you can kind of fade out. Your family might still maintain some sort of a relationship with you, but you will also always be viewed as a lesser person, a person who wasn't spiritual enough and therefore should be treated with caution. But if you've taken the step of getting baptized and then you decide to fade out, or you say to your family, let's say a 16-year-old who's been baptized, and they then say, I don't believe this anymore. Well, that's when ostracism and shunning takes place. That's when families are literally torn apart, because the expectation is if somebody has gone to the point of getting baptized, there is no out. There is no way to leave with dignity. There is no way to leave with your self-respect and to leave without being judged in a bad way. So that's the environment that young witnesses are raised in. There's a lot of oppression and expectation put on their shoulders. You need to conform to being the perfect Christian or Jehovah's Witness child.
Another clarification I wanted to throw in too, and I was going to get to this later, but you mentioned it enough times that it's probably a good time to add it. You mentioned earlier, your dad wanted to see his mom at the resurrection, and then you mentioned Armageddon, kind of talking about end time stuff. I know some of those terms from how we would have used them as Baptists and Presbyterians, and some of the whole pre-trib, post-trib arguments, and pre-mill, post-mill, and all that. But what did the end times look like for a Jehovah's Witness? And you mentioned too, like you're praying for Armageddon. I know from our perspective, we were expecting Armageddon, and we kind of knew that it would happen, but we weren't praying for it. And almost you get the sense sometimes from some Christians that if there was any hints that the end times were coming, you should almost like try to work against it, which is really weird, because you'd be like, don't you want Jesus to come back? But for example, it talks about how there will be like a one world government and the mark of the beast, and that's like that's part of the end times. Like that's the sad part of the this is where the tribulation's occurring. And if you ever had a politician or somebody in a high up position trying to push for like some kind of one world government, the Christians would be up in arms like, no, we can't go to one world government. That's of the devil. It's like, but wait a second. That's part of the end times, which means Christ is coming back soon. So don't you want that to happen? But they're like, no, we can't let that happen. That like you can't let Christ come back. Wait, what? So there's a lot of interesting dynamics to it. But could you take us pretend I don't know anything about it, even from my side? What does the end times look like for a JW?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Thanks for sharing that too. My apologies to yourself and anyone who's listening, because a lot of the terminology we used, Jehovah's Witnesses being an insular sort of group, we can throw out words and expressions that are in speak or loaded language, or I can't think of the expression, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I guess, all right, the 1 minute elevator pitch. If I was going in the door-to-door ministry, perhaps, and knocking on somebody's door, knocking on your door for the very first time, my pitch would be that we're here to share the good news of God's word, the Bible. As one of Jehovah's Witnesses, we've studied the Bible in depth, and we're here to tell you that there is a wonderful future ahead. And Jehovah God, that is the Almighty who created everything, has a wonderful purpose in store for the future, where he will clean up this earth and get rid of all the badness that we have, all of the problems that exist on this earth, and bring in a paradise earth, just as he originally had in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And everything will be restored to perfection. Sickness will be gone, wars will be gone, famine, food shortages, everything will be gone, and people will live unitedly forever. They will never, ever die on earth. You will never die. You will never get sick. You will never grow old. You will live in perfection forever on earth. And that will happen any day now. And in order for that to happen any day now, Jehovah is going to bring in the war of Armageddon that Revelation speaks about. Insert scripture here. That war will destroy everybody who is an unrighteous person, wipe out all of the governments of this world because they're corrupt, restore the world to a one world government under the rulership of Jesus Christ, who will rule from heaven with 144,000 co-rulers who have been chosen from the earth. They are the only people from earth that will go to heaven. The 144,000 who will form a government in heaven headed by Jesus under the direction of his father Jehovah, who will administer all of earth's affairs. They will resurrect any faithful people who have died for the last 6,000 years of mankind's history, and they will also get the chance to rule on earth, or to live on earth forever and ever. If you've lost your loved one, if you've lost your dear mother, well, you will have the opportunity to see her resurrected back on this perfect earth, where she too will be given the opportunity to worship Jehovah and live forever and ever on earth. So that's the happy message we're here to share with you. That's what we basically say at the doors. Now, I realize as I said this now, a little bit of, well, quite a lot of cynicism and sarcasm came out in my voice, because I'm hearing just how many flaws there are with those doctrines as I share it. And yet I fully believe that, Tim, as did all Jehovah's Witnesses. We fully believe that any day now, that, you know, the Bible has been prophesying this. There are so many biblical prophecies that it can use, that any day now, Armageddon will happen. And before Armageddon happens, we will have what's called the Great Tribulation, where the world will get worse and worse and worse, and there will be an increase of wars and violence and unrest and environmental problems and all of that. So everything we see on the world today is actually a good thing, because that proves that the end times are coming very, very soon. It proves that Satan, who's currently ruling this world, can't do a good job of it. Satan and all of the governments are under his control, and they can't rule this world. So it's clear that we need God to step in with this kingdom that Jesus is establishing to sort everything out, where Satan will then be thrown in the abyss for 1,000 years and locked up. The earth will be restored to this paradise. Everyone will be resurrected. We'll be living in the Garden of Eden. Everything will be wonderful. Oh, and after 1,000 years, we will see Satan let out of prison, where he will then get the opportunity to roam around the earth and tempt people again. And he will take as many as the sands of the sea, will once again fall victim to Satan's influence. And then a second destruction will happen, where Jehovah and Jesus and that 144,000 ruling party will wipe out everybody. And that's the second death. That's total destruction from which there is no resurrection. And then you get to live for eternity on earth. So for Jehovah's Witnesses, there's a real loaded thing in that. You have to be good enough to be the perfect witness now. You have to be doing everything according to the dictates of those taking the lead in the Jehovah's Witness religion, which is 8 men in New York. You have to be the perfect witness. Then when Armageddon happens, you may survive and you may get through. Then you get to live for that 1,000 years as Earth gets returned to perfection. But then you get another test. So you still have to be on guard. You still can't slip. And then you might be destroyed. And if you pass all of those hurdles, then you will get to live forever and ever in perfection. So you can see what pressure that puts on witnesses. They never feel good enough. You never feel like you're worthy of surviving this destruction or the one in 1,000 years. Are you good enough? You know, there's that constant pressure to perform and conform and be
someone's
the best.
looking over your shoulder all the time, or what are you doing?
Yeah,
I'm going to get you. I'm going to find that fault in you.
Absolutely. And that here we're in this, as witnesses, you're in this very awkward situation where you love God and you love Jesus and all of that, but you also know they're looking to see whether you slip up, and you don't want to hurt them. So you live in this healthy fear of God, which they say is a fear of displeasing him. But at the same time, we're imperfect humans and we're going to displease him every day. Oh, but he overlooks that, but not to the point where you can continue to sin. So there's this constant pressure that witnesses live with. And that's the world that I was born into. And that's the world that, 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses are born into, where you're never quite good enough. But maybe if you just keep trying, you'll get through and you'll get to live forever and ever in perfection. Now, there's so many problems in that doctrine. There's so many flaws. How does the paradise work and all that?
Yeah, and I definitely want to dig in. That was just as like a first impression. The one question I would have, and maybe it's more of an assumption, I just would make sure I'm seeing it right. But from an outsider's perspective, it sounds very potentially oppressive and burdensome. But would it be fair to say that for the people that are in it, it's just like the biggest joy that they're like? Do people seem joyful in there, or is it gloomy all the time, or do people feel like we're this, like very few people get there? The path to destruction is wide, and many people go that way. The path to life is narrow, and we're on this narrow path. We made it. It doesn't matter if it feels a little burdensome some days. Like we won. Like we're on the right path.
Yep.
Does it feel like it's joyful? Does it feel like it's gloomy in a Kingdom Hall?
Yeah, look, that's a great question, Tim. When you are in and you're in the middle of the congregation and you're in the middle of the organization doing everything you possibly can, it can be a very happy life because you are surrounded by people. That groupthink exists. You are surrounded with people who think the same, do the same, who are just lovely people. They present well. Jehovah's Witnesses have a very high standard of dress and grooming. You can't have a beard. You wear a shirt and tie. You are the perfection of outward appearance. And so that creates a comfortable environment if you are in the middle of that organization. The flip side is it also creates a very unhealthy view of yourself, your organization, and the world and those outside of the religion. I realized that being raised, I can speak for myself, I was privileged to be born into a wonderful Jehovah's Witness family, be it my father, not so much my mother. I was privileged to be born into the one true religion. I was privileged to have been chosen by God and given that opportunity to be born into that religion. But that creates an unhealthy and toxic mindset too, because what that makes me do is look at everybody else outside of the religion as somebody who is to be treated with caution. Worldly people is the expression Jehovah's Witnesses call anybody who is a non-witness. You are a worldly person. Now, worldly should be a good word. It means you're educated, you traveled, you're knowledgeable. The Jehovah's Witness use of the word worldly is a derogatory term, a judgment term. Yeah. So you need to be on guard against worldly people. Now that includes people who might be Christians, because even those who claim to be Christians, well, they're false Christians. They're not in the truth. They're actually blinded by Satan. They're part of what's called Babylon the Great, which is the world empire of false religion. And Christians or part Christendom are some of the worst because they should know better and they should know the truth, but they're blinded by Satan and they have a distorted view of the Bible. And so here you've got this environment you're raised in as a witness, where we're privileged to have the truth. We look down on everybody else who's not. Sure, we go witnessing to try and bring you non-witnesses into the one true religion. But if we were to knock on your door, Tim, and you said, yes, I know my Bible inside out, back to front, I'd love to have a Bible discussion, my mind is already on guard against you because you are not a true Christian. You claim to be a Christian. You're one of the ones that Jesus warned us about, who said, Lord, Lord, don't we, we prophesy in your name and we do powerful works in your name. And yet I will say, get away from me, you workers of lawlessness. I don't know you. So we would view you as that's a really unhealthy way for somebody to be raised.
It's amazing that the way you're describing that is so similar. I mean, some of the theology of the end times is different, obviously, but we would have said the same thing about worldliness. When I say we, I grew up in a very Baptistic background, and then I eventually in Bible college switched to more of a Reformed Presbyterian Calvinistic perspective. It's funny how many people I've talked to who've deconverted, who like Calvinism was their last step. Like for a lot of people, it's like I was a Christian, then I became a progressive Christian, then I left all the way. But for a lot of us, I was like a Baptist, then I became a Calvinist, and then I left. I don't know what Calvinism has to do with it, but it's interesting.
No, that is interesting
pattern. But we would have called, especially the Baptists, they would have called everyone else worldly. We would have certainly called JWs and Mormons a cult. We would have certainly called Catholicism the great Babylon, the great harlot, and the Pope was part of the one world order coming. So we had similar things that we would do, and I remember there's a verse that talks about, I forget where it's at, I should know this from memory, but there's a verse that talks about if someone comes and they're preaching a different gospel, do not even let them in your house.
Yes.
And I remember growing up, my mom saying, when a Jehovah's Witness comes or a Mormon comes, if they come to knock on the door, we do not answer the door. If we know it's them, and if we do answer it because we didn't know it was them, we don't let them in the house. We just don't. The Bible says, do not let someone preaching a false gospel, come in. And we took that very seriously, and it was like they could lead us astray apart from the pure gospel. And it's funny, it's like it's the same thing, but from a different perspective.
Isn't that interesting that all religions have this fear of the other or the outer?
Yeah.
And yet, if you have the truth can withstand any scrutiny. Truth can withstand any discussion because you have the truth. You have the gospel. You have God's word. It's very interesting when religions discourage or outrightly forbid people from speaking to those from another faith. If you've got nothing to hide, if your faith is solid, then what do you got to fear by having a conversation with somebody who's outside of that bubble?
Yeah. I think it was Spurgeon said something, I can't quote him directly, but it was something along those lines of, he was saying people feel like they can't, like they have to defend the Bible. And he's like, the Bible doesn't need defending. It's a lion. Just let it out and it will roar and do its thing. Like, God's word doesn't need defending. It'll defend itself. But when you actually get to it, when you're just like, okay, well, let's practically look at this, they won't tell you almost anything about its origins. I mean, almost every Christian I've spoken with so far in this 2-year journey, I deconverted 2 years ago exactly. I think to the day. I'm glad to be talking to you on
happy anniversary.
Thank you. Yep, it was around October 1st of 2019. Wow. But the just this whole idea of the Bible is totally able to defend itself, and yet almost nobody knows where it came from, how it was edited, who was on the board that decided canonicity. And you start saying stuff to Christians like, did you know there's 40 or 50 gospels and probably a lot more, probably at least a couple dozen more? Do you know there was at least 6 books of Acts? Do you know there's dozens
Did
of
you
epistles?
know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John didn't write the books? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
Yeah.
And their minds just go, and they reject that conversation.
Yeah. But the church just won't tell even the very basics. And it's like, if you expect people to truly believe that this Bible can just go out there and change the world, at least tell people, where did you get this book? Because otherwise, and it was amazing to me too, just to add to piggyback off of your worldly comments. One of the biggest things that was like a fear factor for us was you'd hear these stories of kids going off to secular college, and they would, you'd assume that they got exposed to feminism, they got exposed to evolution, they got exposed to some kind of secular humanism. And you'd see kids just say, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm a nominal Christian, but I don't really care. I've got better things to do with my life. And there was this fear of like, oh no, like what if they go to college, so-and-so goes to college and it's not a Christian college, and they're in so much danger. And yet it sets up this paradigm of like, the more knowledge you get, the more of a threat it is to your religion. Like you don't realize it when you're in it, because you think that the knowledge is like pretend knowledge. It's like, that's not real knowledge, that's just worldly knowledge. But when you actually step back, you're like, no, they're just getting an education. But the more educated you get, you realize there's more holes in this than you ever even imagined.
That's a really good point that you make. And I think what you're highlighting there is, when somebody is outside of their religious bubble, they're introduced to the concept of critical thinking, not criticism thinking, but the ability to think critically, analytical thinking. Jehovah's Witnesses outrightly discourage higher education to their members. And the reason they say is because when you pursue higher education, you will be taught to doubt your faith. Well, critical thinking is something that we as humans, or analytical thinking, because I think amongst the Jehovah's Witness bubble, when you say critical, they don't understand properly what it means. They think it means somebody's going to come along and criticize and pick on you. Well, no, analytical thinking, let's say instead. We do that with every other part of our life. If we're about to buy a car, or if we're about to buy grocery items at the supermarket, we use analytical thinking. We compare and contrast things, but we don't do that with our faith. And so when people are exposed to the opportunity for higher education, we're given the chance to use critical thinking skills. And it's interesting how many do walk away from their faith as a result of that. It's not because of demonic influence. It's not because of being exposed to all these sorts of worldly thinking. It's just the ability to be able to compare and contrast and ask themselves, does this faith make sense? And so it's no wonder that insular groups discourage people from going outside of their bubble, because maybe people might start to ask questions.
Yeah. Well, before you go on with your story, could I ask you a few more clarifying questions about your beliefs? What did you all believe about the destiny of people who did not believe, that weren't Jehovah's Witnesses? Was there a hell? What happens to everybody? I mean, I know physically they get annihilated at Armageddon, but say someone just they don't live that long. So like say I'm outside of it and I just die of a car accident tomorrow. What happens to that kind of soul? Do they go anywhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. So fundamental things, Jehovah's Witnesses do not believe that humans possess an immortal soul.
Okay.
You don't have a soul, you are a soul. You are, the soul is the person, the living, breathing person. So there's nothing that can float off to heaven or hell after death in Jehovah's Witness theology. But there are a lot of problems that are raised with this. So the number one thing is, if you are given the opportunity to be preached to and share the truth of God's word by one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you then have that choice. If you choose to reject that, well, when Armageddon comes, you had your choice. Jehovah saw you use your heart and you said no to the message, so you're worthy of destruction. The question that raises too is, how far can Jehovah's Witnesses preach? 3/4 of the world have never heard the message of Jehovah's Witnesses. They're a small little group that hasn't gone to vast swathes of the world. So what happens if Armageddon comes tomorrow, as Jehovah's Witnesses preach and predict? And 100 billion people or whatever around the world haven't yet had the opportunity to have a quick discussion with one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh, well, the answer Jehovah's Witnesses say that is, well, God will read their hearts. Okay, all right. So they then get an opportunity to live or die. If they're judged unworthy when God reads their hearts, and again, that exposes a problem. If God can read their hearts, then why do Jehovah's Witnesses need to go preaching at all? Why doesn't he just read the hearts of everybody? Like it also exposes that Jehovah's Witnesses are expected to go preaching just to keep them on the busy treadmill of Jehovah's Witness activity. It's not actually to preach to people, because God's going to read their hearts whether they get preached to or not. Again, analytical thinking gets you into huge trouble, because you just start to question all of these things. So let's say people are judged unworthy by God, who reads their hearts at the time of Armageddon. They will just be destroyed. That's it. They won't feel any pain. There's no eternal punishment. There is no hell in the Jehovah's Witness thinking and doctrine. So there's nobody burning forever and ever, overseen by a devil and pits of fire and sulfur. That doesn't exist. That was Christendom who brought that false teaching in, and that's not part of the Bible according to Jehovah's Witness belief.
It sounds like when you talked about Armageddon, and I want to keep this short, because I know the end times is not the only topic on the table, but it sounded almost like a reincarnation concept, where like the Jehovah's Witnesses that made it through Armageddon, that they'd live for 1,000 years, but then God wipes out everybody. Did you say?
The 1,000 years that they live in perfection is with Satan being taken out of the scene. He's not there able to influence people. Right. He's locked up in. But
then when he comes back, and there's another like war and deception and all that. What happens for God to purify at the final time? Does he kill everybody?
All those who have been perhaps influenced or manipulated by Satan and his demons, who are let out of the abyss, yes, they will be destroyed.
Okay, so if you were to look at it, so it's like, it sounds like it's a funnel. Like there's the whole world currently, for all of human history so far, and anyone who's been an actual JW, so this little teeny slice of it, they're gonna make it. And I assume that those who have already died physically will be resurrected to the 1,000-year reign?
Yes, yes. So Jehovah's Witnesses believe that when you die, you're acquitted of your sin. You've paid the ultimate price by dying, so you'll get resurrected back and given the opportunity to determine whether or not you want to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses in that 1,000-year rule.
And then after the 1,000 years, if there's this group of just pure JWs and no one else, then when Satan gets released after 1,000 years and he deceives some of them, the pot gets smaller. And then though that smaller subset is what makes it into eternity future, forever.
Yeah, into the paradise earth. Yes.
Interesting.
Where everything will be perfection and utopia.
I have so many things I could say about it. I'm going to hold my tongue because I want to get to your story.
Look, I agree, Tim. There are so many points, and I think those who have questioned the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses and many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses can just go, yeah, but what about this? What about transport? What about sanitation? What about food? What about manufacturing? What? Well, just trust God. It'll all be wonderful when you get to this paradise. Everything will be wonderful, just as it was for Adam and Eve. Yeah.
It's funny you say that. There was one of the things that we talked about a lot when in the groups I was with growing up is the whole question of when is the millennium going to come? Is it pre-trib, post-trib, etc.? And this one teacher of mine, he used to say, He said, when I read the pre-trib stuff, I'm so convinced they're right. And it's going to come before the tribulation. And then he said, I'd read the post-trib stuff, and I said, that sounds more biblical. I think you're right. And he would go back and forth. And he said, in the end, he became pan-trib. And I said, what is pan-trib? He said, it'll pan out in the end.
Just trust God. Yes.
Trust God. Yeah.
Don't ask questions. Just make sure you get there into the end. You'll find out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's almost like a positive spin on, just kill them all, like God sort them out.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to get back to your story. So you were very serious about this, though. You didn't try to push against your dad. You were going along with it because I heard you were baptized at 15. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, I went along. I was the perfect Jehovah's Witness child. And as you asked earlier, was it happy? Well, I had friends and I had a routine of life and everything I just thought was normal. I loved going to the meetings. I didn't always love walking around on a hot 40-degree summer's day, knocking on people's doors for 4 hours on a Saturday morning, sure. But I did it because it was the right thing to do. And I was making God happy. And Jehovah's Witnesses raise their children to say how you act as a child, you can make either God happy or sad. And so there's a great burden on the shoulders of a little 5, 10, 12, 15-year-old that how you act will make the divine being, the Almighty, happy or sad. He'll look down and go, Sacha went witnessing for 4 hours today in the summer heat. I'm so happy. That's a lot of burden that is put on the shoulders of children. But
yeah.
But
and when you said 40 degrees, I assume that's Celsius.
Celsius, yes.
40 degrees Fahrenheit would be very, very, very cold.
Yeah. Imagine a 100-degree summer's day in Perth with the sun radiating off the hot asphalt and you're knocking on people's doors in a shirt and tie.
Yeah. Well, in terms of, just before you go into, we want to get into some of the other stuff with pioneering and all that in Bethel, but I did just want to ask, take us into your, just you and God. So your parents have tucked you in at night and you still got some brain activity going. You've got some sugar giving you, another hour's worth of thought, and you're just laying there thinking, contemplating, reality or whatever, the universe, your week, your day, how you're doing. And, I'm sure you're taught, as we were, talk to God. If you're awake at night, God's probably trying to get you to talk to him. Speak, Lord, your servant is listening, like Samuel would have been told.
Yeah.
And when you're looking back at your childhood, say, preteen years, what was it like? Did you feel like you felt God's presence? Did you ever feel like, I'm scared of, whether it was something as simple as a thunderstorm, or is there a boogeyman in the closet? Or, I'm not going to pass my test at school tomorrow. Like, did you feel like God would come in sometimes and flood you with peace? Did you ever see kind of this sense of like, I know, like, it doesn't matter what you tell me, I sense he's doing stuff. I sense he's here. He's in my life for real.
Yeah, good question. I always knew that Jehovah was there with me. He was like a friend to me, and yet I never felt worthy to be a friend of his because he was so much higher than me. I'm just a little nothing. I would pray, but I would also feel frustrated because I didn't necessarily always hear a response. And, I understand that friendships are actually about communication, and communication is two-way. But this whole concept that we all have of praying to the Almighty, well, that's only one way. And I know that religions say, well, he communicates with you via your feelings, via his word, the Bible, via the message that comes from the pulpit or the platform at church. That was God's way of speaking to you, by creation outside. So I would look for things like that, a beautiful flower. Oh, that was Jehovah showing me he loved me. A thunderstorm, well, that was Jehovah showing me how much power he has. So I don't need to be scared about anything, because the same God that created the universe and controls the lightning and thunder is the same God who says, I'm your friend. So I'd feel comforted by that. If I was bullied or picked on at school because I was the oddball who believed in a weird religion and, was on the outer to the rest of the kids at school because I was, a weirdo in comparison, I didn't have to be worried because Jehovah was there. He was my best friend. So again, I realize what arrogance that actually creates too, because here I am walking hand in hand with the Almighty God who thinks I'm A-okay. Well, that's not healthy either for a child to be raised in that way of thinking. But be that as it may, that's how I felt. Jehovah was there for me. He was my friend. I can remember, sometimes being really scared or fearful of things that were happening in life, but I knew that Jehovah would always be there for me. And you could call out to him at any time. If you felt really scared or thought there was that monster in the closet, that's okay. Call out to Jehovah. He'll get rid of it for you. Having said that too, as a child, you're also raised in the Jehovah's Witness bubble to be ever conscious of the fact that Satan and his demons are roving around the earth. And so you would also have this unhealthy belief that satanic and demonic influences were in everything and everywhere. And so there was this great rivalry happening between good and bad all the time. And how I chose to act could either be making Satan happy or Jehovah happy. If I read the wrong book, if I listened to the wrong music, if I had the wrong thoughts, Satan would be, God, I got him. Sacha's pleasing me today and he's displeasing you. So that's really toxic thinking as well. So I'd be constantly struggling with praying to God saying, I had a bad thought today, which wasn't a bad thought. It was just a normal thought. Or, I think I listened to a rap song today that maybe wasn't a very biblical thing. And I'm sorry I'm let you down today. So I guess my prayers consisted of a lot of apologies to God for how broken I was and how much I'd sinned against him for not actually doing anything bad, but just for not being the perfect person that I was supposed to be as a believer. I'm sure you relate to that, and so many others do.
Yeah, it definitely was very similar with that. I often, I don't know if you would relate to this, but it felt like a lot of times there was this dichotomy that I just assumed people felt of God's presence, in the sense of I knew that I really loved Jesus. I knew that, like, I saw the fruit of the Spirit. When I was 5 years old, I absolutely made a profession of faith in Christ, and it felt so real. And when I would read, my mom would read stories about these missionaries. Like, one man was called Hudson Taylor, who had gone to preach to the Chinese back in the long time ago. And he gave up everything. Like, back then, all the Chinese men would all shave their heads except for this long ponytail in the back. And this, very proper British man went and dressed like them and shaved his head. And I thought, what an amazing thing that he would do anything, even change his appearance to fit in so he could give them the gospel. And as
all things to people of all sorts, as Paul said.
And as an 8-year-old, I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be the next Hudson Taylor. I want to turn the world upside down for Jesus Christ. And it was real. And I would sometimes see kids who were in church, but they were kind of always purposefully misbehaving. Like, they were always the ones causing trouble, talking back. And I was like, why do you want to do that? Why do you want to talk back all the time? Why don't you just sit and listen and enjoy the class or whatever? And I got this sense that there were kids that were just always trying to make trouble. And you could tell the other kids, and I kind of included myself in this in a semi-arrogant sense, like, I'm one of the kids that really, I want to listen to the preacher. I want to listen to the Bible. I want to love God. Like, I'm real. And so the presence aspect, like, God is here. He's present with me. 9 times out of 10, it felt good, because I was like, and I know now it's just like an alter ego. It's part of my consciousness, but it felt like he's watching me. He's obviously, he needs me to confess my sins and make it right. But he's saying, I'm here with you, go, represent me to the world. And I often felt like it must be weird for people who are constantly talking back to God, as it were, constantly saying, God, I'm not doing it your way, screw you, to think it's the same presence, but he's must be convicting you all the time. And it must feel so weird to be constantly thinking, I'm wrong again. I need to confess again. I need to, make it right again with God. I shouldn't have done that. And like, it was always this sense of like, don't you realize how sweet this could be if you would just do it God's way, if you just repent and just literally, change your mind and say, God, I'm tired of doing it the selfish way. I'm tired of doing it the worldly way. I want to be on fire for you. I do not want to be a casual Christian. I want to transform the world by being so focused on you and on your word and the gospel and your death and resurrection. and the blood of Christ and the power that's there, and the kingdom. This is about the kingdom. Bring people into the kingdom. And I was like, if you just change your mind a little bit, God is willing to take your heart that was previously cold and hard, and he's willing to soften it. And if you'll just meet him a little bit, he'll take your little bit of saying, kind of saying, God, I don't have faith, but give, I lack faith, but give it to me, please. And he'll take your cry and he'll say, oh, I will pour it on you. I will pour the blessings. You tell me you want to transform your mind a little bit. It just saying that tells me you really do want this. I will transform you so much and make your heart beautiful. And I thought, you're so close to the beauty of the presence of God. Why don't you want to let it be a good thing as opposed to a convicting thing? And I often felt bad. I remember distinctly feeling bad for people that were just always in trouble. And I thought, that you're missing the point of God's presence here. He's not meant to just be like, stop, stop, stop. He's meant to be like, I'm here to love on you. And I felt so bad for people that, obviously I see it all differently now, but I remember distinctly thinking it's such a waste.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, Tim. Thank you. Because I think what you've identified there is basic human psychology and the differences between perhaps how we all think, and that depending on how we were raised even might play a huge factor in that. If we were raised in this loving environment where authority figures over us were loving rather than judgmental, well, perhaps then we would superimpose that to the greatest authority figure, being our Almighty Creator, and our relationship with them. So, we talk about our Heavenly Father. Well, that's wonderful if we came from a father who was a loving father. But for a lot of people, they maybe came from a background where their father or their mother weren't loving. And so how do they then form an opinion of the ultimate father, being God, also being loving? So it's actually a reflection perhaps of just their own upbringing and their own view of authority figures. And that can have a huge impact in how people then respond to their motivation to serve God. I mean, for me, I came from what I felt was a loving family. So again, whilst I was conscious that I was a sinful human and I could be upsetting the Almighty Father, I also understood that he was a loving father, because I saw the reflection, my father would do anything for me. So I said, well, if he's a small reflection of what the Almighty Father should be like, well, then he's the best dad in the world, the Almighty One. So I can see how that's a reflection. And look, I had the same thing. I definitely adopted the biblical expression of, Lord, here I am, send me. So I'm ready to do your work. Use me how you see fit, because you are my creator. You are the Almighty. So I was one like yourself that took it seriously, and I would see other Jehovah's Witness children or teens or youths in the organization who would drift away, and I would not understand that, because why would you leave the truth? Why would you leave the truth? I also see that was because I had never actually used my own thinking ability to analyze, is this true because it's true? Whereas maybe those kids had done. They've analyzed it. Is it true because it's true, or is it true because I trusted my parents or my father with everything else? He's the one who taught me not to run across the road. He's the one that fed and clothed me. He's the one that taught me that this religion is right. Well, I trust him on everything else. I need to trust him on that. Whereas perhaps those other ones, we should give more credit to those youths who said, well, yeah, hang on, but why? But why? Whereas I didn't do that. And so I adopted a really devout, believing, invested Christian lifestyle, where I was looking for more and more opportunities to further my service to God, because I thought that was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's a really good testimony too to the effectiveness and there's the dynamic of childhood brainwashing that we know that expression. We all use it. Get them while they're young, and it's people have been saying it for ages. I think there was even some old monk or priest hundreds of years ago that
Jewish
said
rabbi.
If you give me a child before 5, I can make sure it's on the right path, whatever. But if it's after 5 or 7, it's much, much harder. And we know that the Christians do want to, from their perspective, for good reasons, they want to get them while they're young. And obviously, from our perspective, we're horrified at what they're doing with that. But either way, it presents the power of, if you get someone when they're young and you, especially if they're very sheltered, not just exposed to your ideas, but they're sheltered from the other ideas. And if there is any admission that there's other ideas, it's painted with this brush of those, that there are other ideas, but they're very, very dangerous, and don't worry about it. And when you do, we'll tell you about it when you're older, and when you do, you'll realize it's not a good lifestyle. It's not a good worldview. And
well, you pick up on a
good.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
You pick up on a very key point there. It's all about vulnerability. So obviously children, by very nature of being young, are vulnerable and open for malleable and open for manipulation in the way they think. So children are vulnerable. It's the same that we see with people who are attracted to perhaps religious institutions or high control cults now. They're usually at a very vulnerable stage when they're given that material. So they're almost in a childlike state, a childlike state of susceptibility or influence or manipulation or vulnerability. And so I see that as children, we were raised in a religious bubble. We were told what to believe and how to think and how to form our worldview by people that we trusted because we were inherently vulnerable. And so even people later in life who go through turmoil or upheaval or great tragedies, and then somebody comes knocking on their door offering them a solution to all of those things, they're in a vulnerable state. The Bible talks about seeking out those who are sighing and groaning over the detestable things happening on the earth. Basically, look for people who are unstable in their worldview or are feeling lost and alone, and hey, they're going to be susceptible to the message. Now, I know that's a little bit of a cynical way, but a believer will go in and say, well, we're looking to provide the solution to these people who are vulnerable. I see that as being very problematic, and you see people around the world being sucked into all sorts of conspiratorial thinking, usually when they're in a vulnerable state, and religion is the world's greatest conspiracy theory. And people get sucked into that. And the problem is adults can choose to do that. Children can't. Children don't have a choice when they're raised in that bubble.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it's amazing to me when you said the word childish, that verse that talks about, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I spoke as a child, whatever, I behaved as a child. But when I became an adult, I put away childish things. And it's amazing when you realize that people who deconvert, and I know I'm getting ahead of us here, and I want to get back to your story in a second, but just to add this, people who deconvert are not, I don't know how to exactly phrase it the best way, but they're not escaping. I'm sorry, they're not trying to just like buck the theology. They're not trying to say, screw you to God and I won't bow my knee. They're graduating. They didn't rebel against religion. They graduated from it. They were a child when they were in it, and now they're an adult and they're getting out of it, and they're realizing, I don't think there's a place for mythology, but if people want to believe there's a place for mythology, there's a time for Santa Claus, there's a time for Father Christmas, and there's a time to realize that is just a story. And the people that escape are often painted as, you're so wrong, obviously you're so mistaken, but you're like, why won't you get serious about the things of life? You have to be willing to admit you're going to die someday. You have to be willing to face God. What will you say when you face the judgment seat of Christ? Get serious. And you're like, I don't think you're getting it. I did get serious, and that's why I'm out. This isn't real. And it's like, it's just crazy the way it works. Anyway, I'm digressing.
No, that's a good point. We're precisely in this position because we value truth, honesty, and we got serious.
Yeah, about a lot of aspects of the mythology, the academia, the critical thinking, but I was going to say also even just textual criticism, all those things that are, the worldly ideas. They're what helped us to understand that what was going on here. I'm just looking at my notes here. I did want to make sure I asked you a little bit too about you mentioned, we touched on this, but preaching to the lost. What is being a pioneer like? And then could you kind of take us up through that into Bethel? What is Bethel about?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So I took it very seriously, baptized at 16, worked part-time, only finished my high school diploma, I guess you'd say, worked part-time and decided to spend most of my time in the volunteer preaching work. And as Jehovah's Witnesses, that's called pioneering, where that is, you actually, that becomes your career. You don't get paid for it. But if somebody says, what do you do for, what's your career? You'd say, well, I am a pioneer. I am one of Jehovah's Witnesses who spends a minimum of 60 up to 90 hours a month in the door-to-door ministry. I have to work part-time because you don't get paid to pioneer. So you've got to juggle that with a part-time job, which by its very nature is generally not very well paying because it's part-time. So I pioneered for a couple of years doing that door-to-door ministry, and it's long, hard days at times. And you feel like you're basically walking hand in hand with God. There's not always a lot of support out there midweek on a Thursday afternoon or a Wednesday morning knocking on empty doors because most people are out at work. But I did it because it was the right thing to do.
You get a lot of people slam the doors in your face,
Not a lot. There was more apathy, more apathy of just, no, thank you. It was very rare to find somebody who was actually interested. I never brought anybody into the religion. I studied with a few people, but never to the point of baptism.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on the hundreds of millions of hours they spend out in the door-to-door ministry. But really, when you talk about the investment of effort, it's not actually about bringing people in. It's about keeping the existing members busy. It's keeping them on the treadmill of Jehovah's Witness activity, because the effort and the reward, you don't get a lot of people come in at all. The growth that Jehovah's Witnesses experience is really only from the kids they're popping out, is the members popping in the next generation. It's not people from the community coming in. And those that do come in from the community tend to be an unusual bunch of people that come in. It's very rare you get someone who's educated and has used critical thinking and analytical thinking and says, yeah, that's the right religion for me, I'll join that. That just doesn't happen. It's usually those who are perhaps on the outer of society that might be attracted by the love bombing that cults like Jehovah's Witnesses use, where you're suddenly being given a congregation of 100, 200 friends, instant friends who are going to like you by virtue of the fact that you are attending the same services as them, just as cults operate on. So people that get attracted in might be a little unusual like that. But anyway, I spent all that time in the pioneer ministry, and then I had an opportunity that isn't extended to every Jehovah's Witness. It's only select groups that get the opportunity to apply to go to Bethel. Now, Bethel is the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they have branches all around the world. And the Bethel in Australia is in Sydney. So I was in Perth on the west coast. Sydney is on the east coast of Australia. And at 19 years of age, I was invited to go to Bethel to live and work on site there. And that was a huge privilege. My local congregation was so proud of me for being chosen to go there. Not every young Jehovah's Witness is considered to be exemplary enough to go to Bethel.
If you go, is it like assumed you're going to be moving into a leadership position in the church?
Yeah. You are viewed as a spiritually minded young person who's really been blessed by Jehovah and taken seriously to be given that opportunity. Also within the congregation, you've got various appointments. You can become a ministerial servant, which is kind of like a deacon or a pastor in training in the congregation, and then you can be appointed to become an elder, who is like a pastor or a priest or a leader of the congregation. So I progressed up. I was a ministerial servant, plus I get invited to go to Bethel. I was there for 5 years. I lived and worked on site for 5 years in Bethel, and there were 500 people approximately at Bethel. It was kind of the heyday of the Australian Bethel. There were massive growth happening. They were building congregations everywhere. They were expanding the facilities. Their printing was being done of all the books and publications used in the South Pacific, Asia Pacific region.
Mostly men, I assume? Mostly men at Bethel?
Mostly men, yes. Young single men were mostly invited in. Very rare for a single sister or single woman to be invited into Bethel, very rare. There were married couples, and you'd be given it was like hotel style accommodation. You kind of live in this small hotel room with its self-contained bathroom, and everything was done. Your routine was mapped out: 7 a.m. breakfast and 12 p.m. lunch, and then 5 p.m. dinner, and then worship services on Monday night, and then you go to your local congregation midweek as well. it was an intense but very regulated and regimented life. And
Mm.
look, I didn't mind it. I'll be honest. It was enjoyable, because for me, it was actually the first time I got to be, or what I thought, an individual, because I left my family environment where mum and dad had everything. And this is the first time I got to be an individual. So I went from being Rodney's son to being Sacha, being an individual in my own right. And so I enjoyed that. And I made some good friends. I enjoyed my time there. I took my work very seriously. I was really, conscientious and diligent in what I did, because I was in the house of God. I was in Bethel. I was privileged to work here, and Jehovah had blessed me. So I need to give back to him and work really, really hard. And I took it seriously.
Yeah.
And yeah, 5 years I lived and worked on site there.
Can I ask, good. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I was going to just throw in, between some of the stuff you said about pioneering and just the overall context of how the church life worked, it makes me wonder, and I know Sherry and I touched on this briefly, I think, but the whole idea of, like, you really preach Christ is coming back any minute now. Like don't, it almost, I know it's not quite like don't make plans for next week. It's not quite that bad, but it's like, it's really soon. Like don't worry about it. It's going to be around the corner. I could be misinterpreting, but it comes across as if planning for the future isn't probably that necessary, and probably a worldly distraction. And you mentioned, when you're pioneering, you're working part-time. So if people are not focused on their careers because they're pioneering all the time, and even if they have a good, education in one sense, they're still only working part-time hours, so they're not making that much money. But then on top of that, if you're telling people from the earliest days, you don't have much time left. Well, you don't want to go, waste 8 to 12 years getting your master's and doctorate, because you're probably not even going to get finished those before Christ returns. And all this time you could have spent pioneering, you've instead spent in a library with your head in a book. You could have brought people into the kingdom, and instead you were very selfish and just did your personal studies. Like, unless you're going to be doing it for religious purposes, like studying at a seminary maybe to become a minister, like, why would you want to do this? My question is basically, do people struggle financially in that group to be as financially stable as other churches might be, where they would say, no, go to church, get it, get your master's and PhD, and use it to further the kingdom. And then also, how do people deal with that in the context of marriage issues, where, like, if you really, really are totally thinking, I don't know if I'll live the rest of this year before Christ returns, if that's what they're saying, like, even if you have sexual desires, like, why spend your time on that? And then also, like, why focus on having children if they're, like you mentioned, that the church is growing by people keep on having kids. Like, how do they deal with all these subjects of, like, because Paul even says, I wish you were like me, and the time is short. I wish that those who were married were living like they were not. Like, it's a crisis.
There's a disconnect.
Yeah. Like, why are you focused on all these things?
Well, you've touched on so many really good questions and points there, Tim. So the one about education. So yes, Jehovah's Witnesses, ever since their inception in the late 1800s, have been preaching the end is coming any day now. It's not the time to invest yourself in this system of things. And why would you anyway? Because this system is under Satan's control. So why would you invest? Jehovah's Witnesses have been preaching that the end is coming any day now for 100 and something odd years. So in fact, there's a famous quote in one of their magazines in the late 60s where it said, why would you pursue university or higher education? Where will this system be in 4, 5, 6 years' time? Surely the end would have already come. So you would never waste your time doing that. Well, the generation that took that advice in 1968 are retirement age now. People gave up families, the potential for children, education, anything like that. It was always framed that if you got educated or you pursued that sort of thing, it was a selfish thing you were doing. It didn't matter if you were getting educated in order to contribute to the world around you, to become a doctor, to help people. No, it was a selfish thing you were doing because of human pride. So higher education was discouraged. That means that most Jehovah's Witnesses have a lesser income stream, and that didn't matter anyway because the end was coming. You didn't need to plan for retirement. You don't need to plan for what's going to happen. I was raised saying I would never finish school. Well, I'm 46 now. People before me who are in their 80s were told that they would never finish school, and they're in their 80s and looking at retirement and can't fund themselves. How do you get by? They gave up having children and grandchildren and all these sorts of things because the end is coming any day now. But Sherry and I are in that situation. I know we're jumping ahead on the story. We didn't have children because if you were a really focused, invested Jehovah's Witness, you wouldn't bring children into this doomed world. Remember, Jesus said, it'll be critical times, hard to deal with. Mothers will face difficulties when, during the comparison of what he said supposedly on the Mount of Olives about the destruction of Jerusalem. Well, that was a foreshadow of what would happen at the end of this system of things. Why would you bring children into this world? There's plenty of time you could have children in the paradise earth later. So we gave up that opportunity. And it's not that we're bitter about it. We did what was the right thing. Now, what we thought was the right thing. You progress that along 20, 30 years, the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, well, people have been popping children out. And in fact, the organization caters very much to the indoctrination and the education of their young children because they know their members are popping kids out at, a massive rate now because, that's what they want to do. And it's not that family life is discouraged amongst the witness world, but there has definitely been a change in the thinking. 60s, 70s, the end is coming, you don't have a family. Well, they lessened in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, things changed a little bit, but they're definitely building that rhetoric up again now. And so there will be a whole generation of Jehovah's Witnesses in their teen or early 20s that won't be having kids now because the end is coming.
Do you think that for the older people that were in that generation you talked about, when they're hitting their 70s, 80s, do you think some of them are using the fact that they got to live that long as a reason to question the narrative? Or do you think they're just like, well, I guess it's just a few more years and maybe I'll die before it happens, but it's still almost here?
Yeah. Some may question, but you would never know it. They would never be able to voice that outwardly. They would always be told, well, a day is as 1,000 years with God. So, who are we to question God's timeline? The important thing is just keep faithful, brother or sister. Just keep doing what you need to do. And don't have doubts. Don't allow yourself to question, where is this? Because, remember those in the biblical times, where is this promised presence of his? The time is just going on as it has before. So you would never even allow yourself to go down that way of thinking.
Yeah, for sure. And you could always chalk it up to God's sovereignty. He has a reason for doing it this way. I was curious before we, I wanted to start to get into your story and how it relates to Sherry's journey. But I was just curious, when you're looking at, we've talked a little bit about Bethel and leadership and people going into ministry. I know that for a lot of churches that I've been exposed to that are not JW churches, the pastors in a lot, not all, but a lot of circles of evangelical Christianity have an incredible amount of power and sway over their congregations, and a lot of them get away with a lot of stuff, almost, arguably almost criminal stuff, in the sense of abuse of congregations, covering up things that should have been reported to police. And even if it's not like that, it's just like this whole idea of like, I'm the spokesman for God. Unless I clearly contradict God, anything that I say, including just applications of his truth, you need to, like, if I was speaking to someone who she grew up in a church where the pastor said it back in the day that a television was a way for demonic activity to come into your house. You must get rid of them. And so all these people in the church got rid of their TVs. And so, pastors can hold incredible sway. And I was curious if it feels like that, or if there's any kind of different dynamic. Like, is there more of a balance of power where if one pastor says, I really, really think we should all get rid of our TVs, that someone else might say, well, you're one voice among many. Like, how does that balance of power work for leadership?
Well, with Jehovah's Witnesses, there's no room for individuality and individual thinking, and there's no room for a congregation to be influenced by the local body of elders, because everything is about conforming to the direction of the governing body, who are located in upstate New York at the central headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a body of 8 men, stale pale males, I like to call them, who are stuck in the biblical way of thinking from the 50s. They believe they are the sole conduit of communication from Jehovah God to people on earth today. And the governing body regulate and control all congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses all around the world, so that there is absolute conformity in the way things take place. So there's no room for individual elders. There may be a slightly different atmosphere in certain congregations based upon the local body of elders, but that'll just be a personality thing. But it certainly wouldn't go so far as teachings or dictates or doctrines. Everything comes from up top. And the level of control is extreme, because the governing body are God's channel of spokesman here on earth. So all of the material, every congregation around the world studies the exact same material and has the exact same program every single week. And that comes from the governing body.
Interesting. That's a lot of control. This is maybe a question for a good segue back to your story. Did you ever know anybody growing up that had become an apostate? And if you did know, what happened? If you didn't know, just what would have happened if you had known someone that became an apostate? And then if you want to segue that into the rest of your story, feel free.
Yeah, those that left the congregation, it was rare, but I heard of some. The gossip amongst the congregation would be huge, and the narrative would be so controlling. You were told not to speak to those people, and I think humans, being what they are when it comes to the rumor mill, those people were made out to be as bad as they possibly could be, and they may not have been. They may have just decided to leave the congregation or leave the religion, but we were really warned against anybody who had left. An apostate was the worst form of anything. They were somebody who could never, ever be forgiven by God again. So yeah, I knew of a few like that, but I was warned to stay well clear of them.
When you say you can't talk to them, are you saying you can't talk to them like about church things, or like you just can't talk to them?
You can't talk to them at all.
Wow.
No, you are not even to say a greeting to them.
What if they were in your household? What would you do?
So the official line from Jehovah's Witnesses are, if somebody chooses to leave, or they're disfellowshipped, or if they even speak out against the organization and therefore are labeled as an apostate. If you're in the family, normal family relationships continue. That's what they say to the public. That's not really what it is. Generally, if somebody's apostate, families will be torn apart. There is such a distrust and such a fear put in. If somebody is deemed to be questioning the religion and maybe has apostate leanings, I've seen countless, I've lost count of how many families have been torn apart, because the believing family member is basically told that there's a spiritual threat. You should be on guard against this. So families are torn apart by that. And so many people I know have gone through that, or are going through this very process, where what was a healthy relationship before has been completely and utterly devastated because they just dared to question whether or not this was the one true religion. And then once they are labeled as an apostate, the congregation, the culture, the teachings, the doctrine, the dictates from the governing body will say to that person, your family member really shouldn't be trusted anymore. Should you love your husband and wife or child or parents anymore because they've turned their back on God? How can you love them? And so families disintegrate. And it happens around the world on a daily, weekly basis. It's heartbreaking.
That's amazing. It's I know a little bit of that from our side, the Baptist Presbyterian side, but there's quote unquote a little bit more grace there. I think that sense of the prodigal son story, like you went into the world, but I'm going to just sit at the edge of my porch and watch you every day, and when you come, I'm going to come running back. Thank you so much for coming back, and give you the feast. It sounds like there was more like that in my experience. It sounds like it was a little bit more of a harsh background for yours. Well, with that as the backdrop, what happened after Bethel?
Yeah, I spent 5 years there. I left at 24. I'd met Sherry. We knew each other as teenagers, and then we reconnected, and we got married. Now, we could have gone into Bethel, or she could have come into Bethel, and we could have stayed there as a married couple. But we felt like we would rather go out as a couple and pioneer, just be in one of the local congregations and pioneer and work part-time. So we chose not to apply to stay in Bethel. We could have done that, and who knows what our life might have been like. But just for various reasons, we felt better on the outside, and didn't want to just stay inside of Bethel. And I felt like I'd given 5 years of service to God there, so it was time for us to give service in another field of spiritual activity, which was the pioneer work. And, we had a great couple of years pioneering together. There's a lot of pressure, though, because, again, I was trying to be the perfect husband, spiritual head of the family. And I realized that I probably was a little over controlling, because I expected that we needed to be the model couple. We needed to set the example to all the others in the congregation. A little bit of arrogance there, I think. And so I expected Sherry to be the perfect wife, and we did our best, but the pressure that put on both of us was huge. And Sherry was adjusting to married life. I was adjusting to married life, but here we were so concerned about the outward appearance in the congregation as well, being that perfect spiritual couple. There was a lot of pressure, and what should have been, some of our most fun sort of years of our mid to late 20s as a young married couple was actually all about service to the organization. Well, service to God, but let's be honest, service to the religious organization. Our lives weren't our own. Our lives we were clones of the religion.
And were you moving towards a leadership position? Like, were you intending to kind of use your time of being an example, of being someone that the others could look up to as a way to become the pastor or a pastor of sorts?
Yeah, it's funny, Tim. I always have a bit of a struggle with that, because I was more than happy to be used in the congregation in whatever assignments or position of service was offered to me, but I wasn't pursuing it for status. I'm not like that. Some in the religion were very keen to climb the ladder, so to speak. I was quite happy to just work behind the scenes, and if it meant I could serve as a ministerial servant or a deacon, you might say, great, I'll do that. I'll work. I wasn't trying to pursue a position, but if I was given the opportunity to serve in a position and it would help others, well, I'd take that. And a couple of times I had the opportunity, I was appointed a ministerial servant, I had the opportunity to work toward becoming an elder or a pastor, a leader in the congregation. And I just didn't need that. I felt like if I can help people without a position, I'm fine with that. Having said that, if I was in longer, I may have adopted that or taken that privilege if it was offered to me again. But at the time that I was asked to be an elder, there was 2 occasions I was actually asked by other elders in the congregation saying, we're looking at appointing you to be an elder. If you keep working on this and this, you can be appointed at the next time that appointments are issued. I had already started questioning the Bible and questioning the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses. And I find it ironic that at the time when God was supposedly speaking through the elders and through his channel of communication and saying Sacha's a worthy person to be appointed as an elder, I wasn't a full believer. I had my doubts. And I do find that odd, because if God is supposedly directing things, he should have been able to read my heart. And I realize now, I look back, it was about outward appearances. I looked the part. I acted the part. I did everything right. I was living the perfect Jehovah's Witness life as a man in my early 30s. I was doing everything right in the congregation. And so that's really what this offer of further appointment was based upon, outward appearance. It wasn't upon my heart. So yeah, that made me realize, that actually started to make me question, does Holy Spirit direct this organization? Is God using his Holy Spirit to direct this organization, or is it just a man-made organization based on outward appearances? Because I realized then that if I wasn't a full believer and I was being offered these positions, what about all the rest of them that are serving in this position? Are they actually full believers? Are they actually being guided by God? And I started to sort of expand on my thinking and say, well, if that's the case, is the governing body fully directed by God? Because I could fool God and look the part and be appointed as an elder if I wanted to.
Yeah. It's interesting too, just the whole idea of how you're painting that picture of how things came together. I've had every last response from Christians as you'd expect of why I left. Oh, you wanted to, sin, or you weren't ever really a Christian. But one of the most interesting responses I got was from someone that I actually ironically kind of respect, a friend of mine. But she said, it's really a shame that in all those years you never got into a church that really taught you to just hear the voice of God. And that's why you left, is you don't think it's real because you've never actually experienced him. She's like, I experience God every day. And I was thinking to myself, I was in a Christian home, exposed to several very solid Bible believing churches, Christian school, Christian college, mission school. You're telling me in 43 years, God couldn't just once put me in the right context to give me whatever he would have needed to protect me from atheism, like just once in 43 years? Come on. That doesn't make any sense. Anyway.
Interesting. But the fault was yours, you see. Again, Christians and religious organizations work on the fact that, well, God didn't reveal himself because it's your fault. Yeah. It's always your fault.
Yeah, it's never theirs. Well, you mentioned that you were starting to doubt. Could you take us back? What was the very earliest memory that you have of a crack in the wall? What happened to start this ball rolling?
Yeah, so I was living the perfect life. Sherry and I were good Jehovah's Witnesses. We were in the middle of the congregation. We were doing everything right. We attended all of the meetings, went witnessing, did everything, diligent. We were doing the right thing. We were basically an exemplary couple in the congregation. But I started to question some of the things that didn't add up anymore. Some of the doctrines didn't add up. And I won't bore you with the details of that, but it was actually in the process of preparing for parts at the meeting, for public discourses from the platform at the congregation, where I would delve into biblical research and delve into Jehovah's Witness publications and all of the things that I needed to be able to prepare these parts. I was in the process of that, where you would prayerfully approach God and ask for help in the preparation of that, where things just started to become apparent, where I realized that the doctrines, the history of the organization weren't always honest. There was a whitewashing of the history. There were problematic and troubling things about the organization that just didn't make sense. So it's not as if I sat there and, as you say, as they like to paint out, that I wanted to sin, that I wanted to live a double life or something, and so I was looking for problems. I wasn't. I was fully invested in serving God as one of Jehovah's Witnesses in the congregation. And it was in the process of preparing and delivering those things that the truth of the religion became apparent. And I can remember reading some of the early publications that the religion is based upon and just thinking, this is crazy. It's not even biblical, let alone the problems with the Bible itself.
Like comparing what was being published currently compared to what was published at the beginning, you mean?
Yes. And the greatest irony was, Tim, there was one part that I was asked to deliver that was part of the program for the congregations, and it was about appreciating the rich spiritual heritage that we have as Jehovah's people. And it was to look with respect and awe and reverence to the older publications, go to the library that is at the Kingdom Hall and go through all the material. And it was that very part that made me look at things from the history and go, oh, this is a problem. Maybe they should never have drawn our attention to the historical books. Now, since Jehovah's Witnesses, under the direction of the governing body, have actually been told to discard all of the old publications, they're not available on their website. Anything older than 1980 is kind of viewed as old light. Jehovah's Witnesses say that the light gets brighter, where they take a bastardization of the proverb that says that the light gets brighter. It doesn't mean that you will get a progression of teaching. And that's a whole problematic thing. We can analyze that chapter in context if we wanted to. But they say that that was old light. So anything that is now published is new light, and you need to keep up with God's chariot, which is the material that comes through the governing body, and don't worry about the old stuff. So I can see why, because looking at the old stuff makes you question whether or not this could be God's channel or not. So yeah, that happened for me, but I was then in a situation where I'd find all this material out, but I couldn't take it to Sherry. It's not as if you can go to your spouse and say, I was doing some research in the publications and this doesn't make sense, because straight away the alarm bells would go off. You know, your spouse would have to be cautious. Sherry would have to treat me with suspicion. She'd probably have to go to the elders and say, my husband raised a concern about this. And so I basically straddled this situation for several years, Tim, where I was finding more and more reasons to doubt whether this was God's organization, more and more reasons to doubt the Bible, more and more reasons to doubt whether God was actually a good character or not. But I couldn't take that to Sherry. And so I had to play the part. And I feel when I look back, I was deceptive for a while. There were several years where I had to sort of be deceptive, but I realized that I couldn't just do the atomic dump of information on her and show all of the flaws, because what would happen? You know, I loved my wife. I didn't want to lose our marriage. So it was a really awkward time. And Sherry had noticed maybe my routine wasn't as diligent, but I hadn't dropped my responsibilities. I hadn't dropped my Jehovah's Witness activity. I just maybe, she could tell something wasn't quite the same. But again, though, you can't even have those conversations. It was an awkward time. What I did do, though, through that time was just try to build on the foundation that we did have as a marriage. I tried to change the foundation of our relationship from being something that was based upon the fact that we had the same faith in the same religion, and build it upon the love that we had for each other as a couple, and make that the central focus. So not this threefold cord that the Bible speaks about, where it's you, your marriage partner, and God. I tried to just say, well, us as a marriage can be strong in ourselves. We don't need this third person intrusive religious entity in our marriage. So I tried to just basically create a really happy and safe atmosphere in our home and in our marriage, where I would encourage Sherry to grow and develop and pursue things. She was starting to pursue her career in the medical field, helping cancer patients. So I would show real interest in that. And I think she might have noticed that. She noticed the fact that I wasn't condemning her for missing a meeting every now and then, or missing field service, door-to-door ministry. I was providing a safe place for her to pursue education, pursue her health career. And I think she appreciated that. You know, I think she saw that there was something different in me. And that was also my way of trying to introduce a world outside of the Jehovah's Witness bubble to her and then to us. We'd take a weekend off where we wouldn't go to church, or we wouldn't go to the meetings, and we'd go for a drive to the country, or we'd go to a music concert, or we'd, you know, go out to the city for the day or something, where it was about us. So I tried to really reframe the foundation of our marriage from a religious foundation to a foundation of our love for each other.
Do you think if you had pushed it quickly, that there would have been a good chance that it could have ended in a divorce, or would it have just been more like an earlier shunning that would have occurred? Or like what's the worst case that could have happened if you just come out and said, I really don't think this is real?
The reality is it probably would have ended the marriage if I'd come out too soon, because Sherry would have to have been the perfect Jehovah's Witness wife, and she would have been given support and blessing from the congregation to leave. Now, we might not have been able to get officially divorced, but in order to remarry someone, but we would have been able to separate, and you would have had the blessing of congregation, because I would have been deemed to be a spiritual threat. Yeah. So I had to be very, very careful in how I played that. And I realized that sounds manipulative. I didn't do it for the purpose of manipulating. I did that for the purpose of trying to save our marriage and trying to get a intrusive religion out of our marriage. Yeah. So that was my motivation with it, and just create a safe space for us to be each other's best friends without the religious routine.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to make here, because you know, I get emails from people every week where people say, hey, you know, I appreciate what you're doing, just want to give you a thumbs up, and I'll respond to them and say, well, thank you, I appreciate that, and if you agree with what I'm doing, would you like to consider being interviewed? And sometimes the answer that I get is I'm just in a situation where I just couldn't. I really couldn't. I was even speaking with somebody this past week for several hours. It was a long conversation, but we were talking about this, and the answer was like, there's so many ways in which the spider web of their lives are connected with Christians who've been Christians for 40, 50 years and involved in churches and leadership and all that. And it would just crush people immensely. And they wouldn't, there would be some shunning. Other people would just be in like an attack mode, like you're a bad person, but whatever it is. And just, I definitely want to make sure that, I do send the message to people, like just because you escaped does not mean the whole world, everyone else needs to know about it right away. There's a reason for the Clergy Project. There's a reason for these things, because people need a safe place to kind of process it, number one, because a lot of it you just need to be like, this is so weird for me. There's no God, or is there a different God? Am I in the wrong religion? You need time to process it and heal and reclaim your identity, and then to do what you said, to realize this, when you come out, it will have ramifications. You need to be very judicious. It's like the Bible says, that if I can quote it correctly, be as wise as a serpent and as harmless as a dove. And you do want to be careful, because some people are just, I'm borrowing from everywhere else, but to borrow from the Matrix, some people just are not ready to be unplugged. And if you try to unplug people too quickly, some bad things can happen. And some people are just going to, like me, they're going to, take 6 months to think about it, and then they're going to go on blast and have a platform, and they're all out. No one questions where they're at now. For other people, that is not the right path, and we totally respect that, especially if you're in a country where you're going to get put in prison or killed for it. But even somewhere in the middle, like, just because everyone else has a platform doesn't mean it's right for for certain people to do it. And total respect for people's needs to protect their families and to do what's best for their situation. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
No, plan your exit, plan what's best for you with your own circumstance, your own environment. There is nothing wrong about faking it till you make it if you have to. I think that's very wise that you say that, and also that black and white thinking that we had as a religious person doesn't need to exist. As a religious person, we preached about our thing. Well, we don't have to preach about our non-belief either. If it doesn't work, and if we're not in a position where we can be out safely with our family, don't feel obligated to have to preach about our non-belief now. It needs to be done with a long-term goal in mind. What do you want to achieve by extracting yourself out of this way of thinking or this religion? And what do you want to save along the way? And if it's family or whatever, people need to do what's best for them and their personal circumstances.
Yeah, especially when there's children involved as well. Which ironically was what led me to be much more vocal, much faster. It was my kids. I wanted them to make sure that they knew where I stood with all these things. But for other people, that having kids would be a reason to potentially stay quiet longer. But anyway, I digress there. Take us back. Then you're in a spot though where at this point in the story, Sherry still doesn't really know yet truly what's happening in your life. How did it go from she might see a few things but doesn't quite know what's happening in your mind yet to she figured it out? Like what was that story about?
So as the time went on, a couple of years went on, I would slowly raise certain things with her. Perhaps I would slowly show her an article. And my method was never to attack. So if I saw something in the Watchtower or Awake, which is the Jehovah's Witness publications, I wouldn't specifically go up to her and say, oh, this is wrong. I would go up to her and maybe say, oh, in reading this seems a little, I'm not sure how to take this. Have you got any thoughts on that? I'm a bit confused. And I'd just leave it. And there'd be times where she would see the point I was making, but because I wasn't attacking or pushing her to have to form an opinion, and then I changed the subject and we talked about the garden or football or the cats or something else, it was safer for her. But I think she still realized I was asking questions, but because I wasn't in an aggressive, attacking way of doing it, it didn't cause a confrontation. So, but she knew I was having doubts. And yeah, that's basically the way that I chose to sort of raise things slowly. And I don't know how long I might have done that for, but for us, it came to a head when I was found out that I didn't believe. So we had an employee working for us who was also a Jehovah's Witness, who
Mhm.
found a lot of the research I'd been doing on my computer. So part of
Oh, wow.
yeah, I think for me too, part of the thing that helped me in my working at how to extract and ride that halfway point with Sherry and not come out too much was I've been doing a lot of research on the computer and also joined a couple of ex-Jehovah's Witness forums on the computer under a pseudonym. And I was getting some great advice from people who had walked this journey before me, who had said, don't do this because it'll blow up in your face. Do this. This is the best way to act. This is not the best way to act. And so I was able to glean some really good advice from people that I'll always be grateful to, who would either, through a bad experience, could share what does or doesn't work. And so I was able to see that just form a safe environment with your spouse, just slowly share information, don't do the atomic dump. Now, I'd left that forum open on the computer, I think, and the employee found that. And within one weekend, our life just absolutely imploded. I was reported to the local elders. The elders had emergency meetings about me. I was outed as an apostate. I mean, I'm cutting everything short here. Sherry was informed that I was an apostate and that I was talking to ex-believers on the internet. All of this it was a weekend of absolute hell. And I've actually got the same emotional reaction now, just trying to remember the feelings. I was a blubbering mess. I was in a situation where I wanted to be completely open and honest with Sherry. I said to her, I will show you the research I've done. Ask me anything. I'm an open book. But yes, I do doubt this religion. I doubt the Bible. I doubt God. And her reaction was, to her credit, she was calm. She was shocked. But she said, I don't expect these sorts of questions to come from a grown man. I was in my early 40s, and these are the things that a stupid teenager says. Why are you asking? She said, what's going to happen? Because in that moment, she was worried about who I was. So are you going to start smoking? Are you going to start drinking? Are you going to start being a moral person? Are you going to, what's happening? Who are you? Because she'd been indoctrinated all her life to say that if your spouse leaves, well, who are you as a person? Now, that's why I said to her, I'm happy to share anything. I'm happy to show you my research. She said, well, what other problems do you have? And I said, well, I've got problems with the personality of God. My studies of the Bible are making me realize that I don't know if Jehovah is actually a good character or not. She was shocked to hear that. But I said, but, I'm trying to be a good person. I'm trying to be the most moral and honest person I can be. I've got my faults, sure, but I look at the personality of God and I realize that I'm a better person than he is, because the God of the Bible is somebody who's fine with misogyny, genocide, incest, slavery, homophobia, you name it. I'm not okay with those things. So I feel like I might be a better person than God, if that's the case. And she was shocked, but, again, she said, well, what does this mean for us? So
I'm waiting for the lightning to strike you there.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's just part of it, isn't it? In our deconstruction, we have to analyze not only the religion that we're a part of, and for me, I've been doing that. I've analyzed the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses and realized this is not the one true religion. I could have been born into any religion at any time, and I think that was the truth. But then by questioning that, I came to the conclusion that Jehovah's Witnesses are not the truth. But then I had to, by virtue of that, question the book on which they claim to be based, the Bible, and I realized that Bible is really problematic, and for so many reasons that we could probably talk for hours about. And so I'd said that to Sherry, that it's not just me questioning Jehovah's Witnesses, it's actually questioning the Bible. And then it's actually questioning, is there a God? I'm not sure about these things. And I said, I'm willing to be wrong. I'm not saying I'm dogmatic on this. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that it's okay to not know everything. And so I've got myself to a position, and I was really honest with her. I said, babe, look, I'm at a position where I don't know what I believe, and I'm okay with that. Yeah. But what I do know is that this isn't the truth. Jehovah's Witnesses do not have the truth, and the Bible is not an inspired word from God. That's where I'm at. And the rest, I don't know.
And the crazy thing is, from being in it, and I do too, that those kind of words to someone who's totally taken by surprise by it, that is like absolute spiritually terrorizing ideas. The idea that this might not be, not just like you're not switching to a different denomination. You're not taking a different theological stance on some issue. You're saying this is not real and it never has been. At least that's where it's leaning toward. That is just like, I mean, that's crazy talk. That's cuckoo bananas. Like,
Yeah.
of course that's not true. Of course there's a God. I mean, you know, all the questions that start flooding in, and I got the same response, and it was even described to me by a loved one. Like they said it's similar to as if you said, I just got really addicted to cocaine, and I'd really like you, my loved ones, to be excited about it. Aren't you excited I got addicted to cocaine? And they're like, of course we're not addicted. We're not happy about it. This is a horrible choice you made. And I was like, it just, it's and also
confronting.
Yeah. And you've already had time to process the implications of it. And they're not even in step one, and you're already at step 100 or 500. And you've thought through questions about the afterlife, and they're just like, whoa, brace for impact. It's crazy. It's such a wild ride on both sides.
And I think that's a really key point too. And this is, you know, I think you and I could share this with others if they're watching. Be aware of the fact that we've had all this time to process to where we are now in our journey but they're getting it in that instant. And we need to almost put ourselves into their shoes and make it as soft as possible when we share that news. Because sometimes for us too, when we've deconstructed our faith, we are so over it that we just want to blurt it all out. But we need to be aware of our audience and be aware of how it's going to be received by them. And we don't want to make it hard for them. We don't want to make it maybe even more confronting or cause them to have the rebound effect and dig their heels in and not listen to all of our points because of a fear response or whatever it might be. So yeah, it's a really awkward period of time for people.
Yeah. And another friend that I've interviewed a couple of times, he talks about it as it's like a terror factor. Like you're the ramifications of what you're saying, not just the idea of like, okay, you're an apostate, so you might go, you know, you might not make it to the kingdom, or from my perspective, you're gonna burn in hell, according to our theology. But the ramifications for me as the recipient of this information to say, wait, you're telling me that there's no God, there's no heaven, or there's no God, and that means there's no heaven. And if there's no heaven, there's probably no afterlife at all. And it just, the ramifications start to pile up very quickly. And there's just, it's very apparent to them, there's no way that you're right. There has to be whatever, you know, there has to be a God, there has to be a judge, there has to be a reason there's something rather than nothing. There has to be an afterlife, there has to be an accounting. You know, we're almost like the C.S. Lewis perspective, like we just know we're made for a different world. How can we have all these aspirations for something bigger and greater, to be part of a big story? And you're telling me there is no big story? There's no way. And to them, it's also the idea of a life without God. Even if it were technically true, like even if it's like, for sake of argument, let me grant it for a second, there's no God. That life sounds so awful to me. I don't want it. It sounds like you're jumping into the deep end of the pool of you know, and you're jumping into darkness. Life without God is a dark worldview. And so everything you're telling me sounds horrible. And it's like you have to really, like you're saying, give it time, because it's hard for people in it to process that life is actually much more beautiful once you've escaped the mythology, once you have time to process and the blinders fall, the scales fall. It's a whole new world, but it shakes you up at first. It really does.
Yeah, you know, you think of the scriptures that a lot of people have found that, you know, form their foundation, and they say, Lord, where should we go away to? You have sayings of everlasting life. Well, here we are saying, well, we don't believe this book and this belief structure. And so their mind, their black and white thinking goes, well, what's the point of life then? What is life without God?
Yeah.
And we're saying, as you rightly said, life is actually a wonderful thing, free of the constraints of mythical thinking and mystical thinking and all of that. Life is actually wonderful. And this is our life. You know, there isn't some future utopia that we were living. This is not the trial run. This is our life. So enjoying the life that we have now, free of all of that other influence, is so powerful. It's actually more rewarding. It makes life more precious. It makes things more enjoyable now, because life is finite and we don't get a second run at it. And that can actually be a liberating thing, not a depressing thing. But people need to be able to get to that point, first of all. For some, it is too confronting to not be able to envision a world that goes on forever in the utopia of heaven or paradise.
Yeah. And even just the basics, like you talked about with morality, like, are you saying you're going to go start sleeping around now? Like, do we still have a marriage? Or, you know, what we promised ourselves before God and the church to, be, before God, we're promising ourselves to each other. If you are saying the promise you made before God was to nobody, then did our promise make any difference? And are we still married? And it's just, it's crazy, the assumptions. And I love how, I think it was Penn Jillette, Penn, the magician guy.
Absolutely,
he talked something about some quote that I can't remember the exact words, but it was like, people say, if you don't have a God, what keeps you from murdering people or raping people? And he said something like, I've murdered and raped exactly as many people as I wanted to, and that number is 0. Because I don't want to. And you can choose to be have a morality based on the society and based on your own choices, good choices in our world. And you don't have to just deconvert and suddenly become some kind of psycho. And also the reality of, like, thinking, okay, are you saying that if your God isn't there, you as a Christian are going to suddenly want to do all these horrible things? Like, what does that say about you if you're telling me the only thing holding you back from murdering someone or attacking someone or stealing is this God? Like, really? It's amazing once you start connecting the dots.
Yeah, spot on.
So what happened next in your story? How did you all get past this? Sounds like a very dark season.
Yeah, it was really tough, Tim. It was tough, but I was open with Sherry, as transparent. So she asked me to explain a few things and share with her some of my research. And then she respected the fact that I allowed her to make her own journey. I wasn't saying to her, because I've questioned things, I expect you to conform with me. I just said, you do what you want to do. But she is a really smart, intelligent woman in her own right. And so she started to do her own research in her own time. And some of the things that were problematic for me when I was researching the religion didn't bother her, and vice versa. And some of the doctrinal things or the concerns I had with the Bible didn't bother her at the time. Now, so I think the really powerful thing there is allow each other in a family unit to go where we need to go. And I wasn't going to force Sherry to adopt my worldview or my research. Now, I'm really very fortunate that she did get to the same point where she questioned belief and she questioned the validity of the religion. And her story, as you interviewed her, is unique and worthy of respect in its own right. And I really respect, though, that we've come together and being able to work together post-religion and post-theology and post the Bible, and work just to be there to support other people and just be able to live our own lives together and, form a basis of who we are as people, a definition of who we are as individuals or as a couple, not because of religion. But that took her a couple of years. She would do some research, she'd share some things with me, vice versa, until we got to that happy point where we were completely open, just went, here's another article I found, or here's some more research I've done on that. And so, I don't take for granted where we're at, because a lot of people didn't get that. And I know a lot of families have been torn apart when one questions and one leaves. So I'm extremely appreciative and mindful of the unique position we're in to be able to be a couple post-religion.
Just two thoughts come to mind. And one of them, it's really amazing that, I mean, it's a great thing. It almost chokes me up to think about the idea of when she escaped, and I mean that word very intentionally, when she escaped the prison of what I call the Bible prison, but in this case specifically the JW Bible prison. When she escaped, she had someone who had already walked through that dark path, who was able to kind of be a stronghold for her. And I don't remember everything she said in the interview, but I'm just assuming here that there were some times when I mean, we all know it hits you in waves, like the ramifications of this and the healing and realizing some of the trauma that's happened to you that you have to work through and get past as you're rebuilding your identity. And to think that she had someone, 2 feet away that she could just turn to and say, this really hurts today. And that she had someone, and that you, sadly, at the beginning of yours, did not. You had to go through it more alone. And, totally celebrating that, people do sometimes have a partner that they can turn to and say, you've been through this already. Can you help me go through it? But I do just want to do a little shout out to people that are going through it by themselves. They don't have anybody around them. I'll raise my hand. I'm one of them. But you don't. There's a lot of you out there. I know because you email me every week, and you say nobody understands. I listen to channels like yours or the Myth Vision and others. And it's like it's just obvious that the Bible's mythology. It's so clear. I couldn't go back if I tried. It's like I know way too much to ever go back.
Once revealed, never concealed.
Yeah, I've truly fully left the matrix, but everyone else around me is fully in the matrix, and they think I'm an idiot and a bad guy. And I'm sure with JWs, it's obviously much, much, much worse with the shunning that occurs to that level. But just for those of you going through it right now, where it is just the loneliest road, I'm obviously not going to give you an empty promise that it's going to get easier, because it might not. But just to say, there is a community of people who care about you. Certainly, we're going to talk in a couple minutes about recovering from religion. But there's people to talk to about it, people that care, people that want to say, we have your back. And I just say, I'm really sorry for what some of you are going through. I know it sucks much more than even we're talking about now. And I'm hopeful for you. I'm hopeful for myself, but I'm hopeful for all of us in the community that there are better days ahead. And that's all we can do is try. And like you've talked about, be patient and gracious and loving with those who are still in it.
Yeah, that's beautifully said, Tim. And I know how powerful that would have been for me to hear that in those early years. And I'm sure for everybody else. And, the power that we have now of the modern age, the online communities, the ability to reach out to others who have walked that journey before us. And I stress to people, reach out, even if it's anonymously, even if you need to use a pseudonym, reach out and get that support and that validation and that guidance from those who have gone through it before. You don't have to do it alone. And, you're not being disloyal to your believing family by doing that research. You're actually using your own intellect, and that's okay, and you need support. So there are plenty of us here that are more than happy to just be a sounding board. We don't claim to be experts, but we can share what we've been through and, reach out to Tim, reach out to the channel, and we're there to hear and support.
Well said. I know I've kept you for a while, so just say I'll keep these questions short and quick, but just to wrap up this part of your story, who has shunned you? Has anyone shunned you as an individual and as a couple at this point? And what is that like?
Yeah, we've lost all of our believing family on both sides, Sherry's side, my side. We've lost anybody that we ever thought were close friends, people that we were really close to just literally ignore us in the street. And it hurts, but at the same time, I actually feel sorry for them. Yeah. I feel sorry for these ones because I realize their thinking is not their own, their behavior is not their own. We haven't changed as people. We are still the same ethical, honest, genuine, sincere people that we always were, perhaps even more so, because we're not under the confines and constraints of a religious view. Outwardly, I've grown some facial hair, big deal. That's about the only thing that's changed. We feel sorry for people who feel that they have to shun us because we're no longer part of their religious bubble. I've lost family, but I'm not unique with that. So many people have gone through that. My own father won't talk to me. Again, I feel sorry for him. I realize that he's a victim of cult thinking. He's a victim of manipulation. And again, my heart goes out to anybody who's going through this, that if you've lost family because you've changed your religious views, you're not alone. And also the opportunity to develop a new circle after losing those ones, you start to realize that a lot of these friendships or these relationships maybe actually weren't as solid as we thought they were when we were in our religious bubble. Because if people can throw you away for something like that, well, that's not really a friendship that is worth preserving. Look for the people who actually value you for who you are, with all your differences or variations. You know, true friendship. The friends I have made now are closer than anything that I ever lost. The friends that I call family now are closer than blood family. Family is not blood. Family is the people we choose to surround ourselves with. And there's a massive world out there of really good people that we can choose to call our family. So yeah, I don't think of the loss. I think of what I've gained.
Well said. I was curious if you could just I had two final topics to ask about, each one of them pretty quick. The first one was, you all have been involved, at least I think, if I'm not mistaken here, at least on the periphery of some of the church abuses that have occurred. Is that correct? And could you just tell us some of the things that have been happening, you know, in the news about what's some of the cover-ups that have happened, and just what is your, you know, your heart's passion for these things, to, you know, how they should be resolved at this point?
Yeah, as with a lot of religious institutions, they've been looked at very closely by the government and by authorities. And we know this has been happening for quite some time. Well, Jehovah's Witnesses are no exception, and they've been the subject of many investigations, including an Australian Royal Commission here in Australia. And it was found that Jehovah's Witnesses were an unsafe environment for children. They have a lot of policies, procedures, and practices that are problematic. The government has pointed out several areas where the organisation needs to improve. Unfortunately, because the organisation is very insular and they think that they have God on their side, they've refused to look at these issues. In fact, defiantly dug their heels in and said that this is satanic persecution, rather than what it truly is just the government's trying to help us protect our most vulnerable people in society. So for us, you know, we realized that that was an absolute confirmation that God is not directing this religion, because if they can't protect the most vulnerable members, or if they have a problem when these things are brought to their attention and are defensive about it, that's evidence of no Holy Spirit, no God directing them. So we've worked very closely with a lot of media outlets and a lot of activists to try and help shine a spotlight on the religion. And this is happening around the world. There's been many investigations that are taking place. And yeah, we feel like we can just do our own little bit behind the scenes to help raise awareness to that. Because at the end of the day, it's all about making sure that people are taken care of.
It's amazing how much of that is coming out in the news. And I know it's just the, you know, the internet and everything, that it makes it easier that this stuff has probably been going on forever, but you know, we now know about it a lot more now. But we're doing the same thing here in the United States. You know, I don't know if you follow it too much, but the Southern Baptist Convention is going through a horrific thing with this right now, and a lot of other churches, the Baptist in general, are, but there's other groups going through it. A lot of articles being written, a lot of interviews happening, and I just, if the mythology that you can uncover isn't enough, if the bizarre behavior of the Yahweh character, Jehovah character, in the Old Testament isn't enough to get you out, if the evangelical church's support for Donald Trump wasn't enough, or their willingness to do what they have done in their response to COVID isn't enough, if all that stuff isn't enough, at the very least, like, look at the abuse. I mean, one of the best examples of or one of the clearest measures of a society is, how do you take care of the weakest among you? And these children who don't know any way to protect themselves are being left and right abused by people in spiritual authorities who have access to the truth, you know, for decades, and they're doing this to these kids. And the churches, and you can always say, well, it was a bad actor, it was a bad guy in the midst of a great group. Well, okay, well, if that's true, then how does your group respond when it's brought to light? And over, in denomination after denomination, it's a cover up. It's some way to hush it down. And even I've seen horrifically to attack the person who is the victim, to say you're a liar, or you're just trying to take down a man of God. and it's absolutely overwhelming. And if people can't see all this as not reality for all these other reasons, this should be clear evidence. There
Mm.
is no power in the gospel. The gospel that you
Yes.
claim it can change lives, it is so evident. The gospel could shine through in these cases, and these churches could just shine as saying, we want to be beacons of truth and we want to do what's right. And instead, they protect the perpetrators and they attack the victims over and over and over across the board.
Yes.
And it's horrifying and it breaks my heart. And that's why I've said so often in this channel, this is in large part about protecting children. This
Yes.
religion is psychological child abuse, and we got to protect the kids. We got to.
Beautifully said, Tim. I wholeheartedly agree. And, you know, I will actually use their own book against them, these institutions. The character of Jesus supposedly said, by their fruits, you will recognize these people. Well, they've been weighed in the balance. The fruits have come out, and these institutions are lacking. And if that's evidence of God directing, well, then there's either a problem with the institutions or there's a problem with God, or perhaps there is no God at all. But by their fruits, you will recognize these people. And I think it's very powerful that so many of us that deconstruct our faith, we must have the logical and the analytical reasons behind it, but we also need to have the emotive and the heartfelt reasons behind it. It needs to be a combination of both. And particularly when you look at issues of abuse and the mishandling of things by religious institutions, that pulls on the heartstrings, that's the emotions. But we need to trace it back and go, why is it happening? Well, because of the logical things, because of the analytical, because of the doctrinal things as well. So yes, there's a real motivation for so many of us to help shine a spotlight on these behaviors of institutions.
Absolutely. And we've been talking obviously about a lot of painful situations. And maybe to wrap us up, could I ask, for people that are going through a deconstruction, they're really questioning a lot of things and they feel very lost. Could you give a little plug for Recovering from Religion? What are they all about, and what could people expect if they did reach out to the group?
Yeah, thank you. Recovering from Religion is a wonderful organization, and one of the most powerful things we say to people when you're coming out of your religious bubble is there can be real benefit by meeting up with other ex-believers of your particular religious group. But that can not always be healthy too. That can keep people in a small little echo chamber, and that's not always the best way to process trauma and to heal. So after progressing out of that and deconstructing perhaps whether your religion is right or not, it's better to go to a healthier environment like Recovering from Religion, where it doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter what belief system you came from. If you're questioning your belief and you feel alone, you need support, Recovering from Religion has the tools and the policies and the facilities and the programs in place to help people feel validated and supported, to be able to give people a safe place to deconstruct and to grow as individuals, to learn who you really are as a person. And so they have support groups. We have over 60 support groups that take place all around the world, where people can join virtually via Zoom and just share your stories with other people in a non-judgmental way, a way where people are just going to get it. We're just going to understand. And it doesn't matter whether we came from this brand or that brand of Christianity, for instance. We were all just, I like to say, we're all just different flavors of soda pop. We all came from different beliefs. But the fundamental thing is we've worked our way through that. And now as a group, we can actually help one another to, I guess, reclaim our authentic life. And that's what I love seeing with those who work along or volunteer with Recovering from Religion, or those who pop into some of the support group meetings or contact the helpline. So go to recoveringfromreligion.org. You can see there's a live chat, there's a helpline. It can be confidential if necessary. You get to see people go from this position of feeling fearful, scared, trepidation, not knowing what life's all about, growing and becoming empowered and becoming their authentic selves and absolutely excelling in life. And I've seen people go through that whole journey. And of course, growth and development is not linear. Sometimes we'll have regression and we'll stumble and we need support. But recovering from religion is just one of many institutions that works really hard to help people have the tools and to help them become empowered in life. And I love working along with them. They have a wonderful culture, and they really do respect people's ability to just reclaim their life and become their authentic selves that they should have always been.
I remember when I deconverted, I called, I think it was twice, it may have been 3 times, but it makes a big difference just if you feel like you truly don't know who to talk to. And honestly, maybe you really would prefer to talk to a stranger where you're like, I just want to talk to someone that I know has been vetted enough by this group that they're mature, they're an adult, they're trustworthy. But I'd prefer to talk to a stranger where no matter what I say, I can always hang up and it makes no difference to the rest of my personal life. And the other thing I have tremendous respect for is that it's been made very clear it's not a deconversion pushing process. Like if you call and you say, I'm not saying I'm not a Christian anymore, or I'm not a Muslim, whatever, I'm not saying I want to leave my religion. I'm just saying I don't know what to do with these questions. You're not going to get people to say, oh, well, you need to leave your religion. Like that's not what they do, is it? I mean, I'll let you answer that question, but I've heard that that's not what they're about.
Yeah, exactly right. There's no room for proselytizing, and that means both preaching or non-preaching to someone or pushing someone out of a belief. We have an expression that we use that we will meet people where they are. So if somebody comes to a support group, for instance, and they still want to maintain a faith in God, well, that's fine. Unlike religion, we don't expect conformity. We don't expect people to think the same. So if someone wants to maintain a faith, we respect that wholeheartedly. But if they have things they want to talk about, if they're in the process of questioning, well, that's fine too. It's all about supporting people and dignifying people and allowing people to get to where they need to go in life. And that's one thing I really do respect about support groups. It's not an opportunity to deconstruct a passage of the Bible and the origins of that. There's other forums for that. This is not an opportunity to stand up and make mocking ridicule of religious groups. There's other forums for that. This is just a place for genuine support with respect and dignity.
That's awesome. And I love too, just as a takeaway from that, the idea of giving that freedom to other people around us, loved ones, whether it's, close people or just friends we have, even to my kids. I explain things to my kids. I tell them, we'll talk about stories and I'll say, let's talk about this Bible story, but let's talk about where it came from. And I'll talk, for example, about when I talk about, Jesus, Mary was washing Jesus's feet with her perfume. And I'll say, do you realize that, in that passage, it says Jesus says to the woman, because of what you've done, you will be known far and wide, or what you've done will be known far and wide. Well, do you know that there is a story in the Odyssey where Homer comes home and the nurse washes his feet, and her name is Eurycleia, which means known far and wide. It's the same exact phrase, known far and wide, or renowned far and wide. Her name, Eurycleia, means renowned far and wide. And Jesus says to this woman, because of what you've done, you will be Eurycleia. You'll be known far and wide. And it's like you start to see where these stories come from. And I love to give them that information, but I still add, going back to what we were just talking about, I still add, like, look, you don't have to be an atheist. You can be a Christian. You can be whatever you want to be. But I say, you need to know who gets, and I say this to them, who gets to decide what you believe? And they know the answer is, I do.
Yes.
They say, I'm like, and I'll say, who has the power over your worldview and your mind? And they say, I do. And to give them that freedom to say, you can choose whatever. And if you choose to be a Christian, Daddy will love you all the same. But let's make our decisions with all the information on the table. And it's such an empowering thing to tell people, you don't have to be like me. You don't have to be like me. But
Tim, that's so powerful, because what you've demonstrated there with your kids is the difference between education and indoctrination. Indoctrination tells you what to think. Education teaches you how to think. And what you're providing them is the tools to be able to think for themselves. And that's perfectly fine, as opposed to indoctrinating them in a specific way of thinking, which is unhealthy. So you're creating and bringing these young ones into the world with the ability to form their own opinions and form their own personalities with your complete blessing and approval and support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such a, I mean, what a gift to give to the next generation. I hope we can all see that as a culture, this just to give and to not threaten people, just to take away the threats. You don't have to think like me. And certainly that transcends a lot of topics, but religion for sure. Well, I wanted to end by saying thank you for your story, and thank you for what you're doing for recovering from religion. Certainly thank you for all the lovely ways that you and Sherry support each other. You all are just such a cool couple. I hope to, after COVID and settles down and all that, to come to Australia and meet up with you all. And
we would love that.
Yeah, for sure. But thank you so much. Was there any final words you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Thank you, Tim. No, I appreciate. Look, this was unusual for me because I'm not used to just talking about me. I love supporting people behind the scenes and helping others. So this was unusual, and I feel really privileged to have been able to share this time. And I apologize to those that we waffled for so long. But I think the main thing I just really want to say is that, life is amazing. There is so much to enjoy every single day. And to be able to do that free of any encumbrance, of any burden from a religious way of thinking is just amazing. So get out there and enjoy life, be good to each other and just enjoy the ability to be able to think for ourselves and be the best version of ourselves that we can. And I love the work that you're doing, and I fully support that. And thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. It's been a privilege. And thank you as well. Please send our best to Sherry. And we really appreciate what you all are doing, and hope to speak again soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.